So I want to welcome everybody to our August 15th workshop meeting. And thanks for Select Water for setting in with us today. We appreciate that. And if you want to call for order, Mr. Secretary.
Chairman Cayley,
Yes.
Vice Chair Anselmi Dalton.
Here.
Secretary, myself here. Chair, Commissioner Choma, I believe is absent.
Excused.
Commissioner Glick, absent.
Excused.
Commissioner Hosey. Here. Commissioner Cott.
Here.
Commissioner Lawson, I believe is online. John, are you
Here.
there?
Here. Did you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Commissioner Pence is absent. Commissioner Suker. Yeah.
Okay, before we get started, can we go around the room? I see a couple new faces up there. If you would just introduce yourself and tell us who you're with, give us a little heads up. I'm going to start over here.
Yeah. Greg Curd, University of Wyoming Office of Water Program. And Shell Valley Watershed. Ken Johnson, Shell Valley Watershed. Greg Clifton, Shell Valley Watershed. Rob Raven, Shell Valley. Lucas Bernard, Shell Valley. Fred Barnett, Shell Valley Watershed Improvement District. Kevin in here,
Okay, great. It looks like we got a lot of Shell Valley people here. We appreciate you coming in today. With that, Jason, you want to talk about our financial status? Give us an update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on page 7, actually page 8 is where we're going to start of the e-notebook. We're going to go over the financial status of our 3 accounts, account 1, 2, and 3. And we've got our fiscal manager, David Ray, here. He's going to walk you through that.
Mr. Chairman, David Ray, I'm the fiscal manager for the Water Development Office. So as Director Mead said, we're going to start on page 8 of your e-notebook. So a little background on this process. We go through this every year at the end of the fiscal year. The state's fiscal year ends on June 30th. And so we go through this exercise as we close our books for the previous year to estimate what we think the balance of each account is that we'll have available for appropriation going into the coming legislative session. So on Water Development Account 1, I'll quickly walk you through sort of the highlights of the process, and then we'll just highlight the balances for each account. So starting at the top of the page on page 8, we start with last year's cash balance. And the first thing we do is look at all of the actual revenue that we collected or recognized during fiscal year 23 in this case. So the first line item there is taxes. That refers to mineral and severance tax, our main funding stream. The next line, interest, is really our investment earnings from the cash balance in that account. And that's invested in the state agency pool with the state treasurer's office. The next line, loans and interest, that refers to the principal and interest payments that we received during that fiscal year. The next line, other, refers to things like water sales, other miscellaneous deposits that occur sort of infrequently. And then the last line that is special to this last year, in the previous legislative session, we were fortunate enough to get some support from the legislature in the form of some one-time funding from the general fund. So that 6.3 million that you're looking at there is that one-time funding that was provided to Water Development Account 1. So I would say as we start looking at the balance available for appropriation in account one, it's a little bit better than we talked about in May. And that's because of that one-time funding. So the next thing we do is account for the expenditures that were made in fiscal year 23 out of account one. And that gets us at a calculated cash balance at the end of June 30, 23. From there, we look at all of the active project appropriations that we have, and we count those as a commitment. We offset that with any historical expenditures that have already been paid on those projects or appropriations. And that helps us to arrive at what is essentially our total commitment at that point in time. If all of the full appropriations were to be fully spent. So when we compare that to our cash balance, that leaves us with our total uncommitted balance. You'll see in this case in water development account one, it looks like we're a little bit upside down there. And that's because the projects, the appropriations that were passed in the omnibus bills in the last legislative session were really based on anticipated revenue this biennium, so fiscal year 24. So because we're just starting fiscal year 24, we haven't actually recognized that revenue yet, the mineral severance tax. So that shows up below, and that's why it looks like we're upside down there. If that makes sense. So then below that total uncommitted balance, sorry, I went a little fast in my notes there. We have what is essentially our anticipated revenue over the next full biennium. Now, because we're in the middle of a biennium, we're including that last year, fiscal year 24 here. But as I said, that was really appropriated last legislative session in those omnibus bills. So fiscal year 25 and 26 is really the next biennium. That's going to be the future anticipated revenue that we plan to have available to appropriate over the next 2 years. We're entering a new 2-year cycle this year. So that leaves us with a balance available for appropriation, which in the case of account one here, it looks really nice at $54,723,195. However, we know that water development account one also funds a number of non-project administrative costs through other state agencies and other programs. So we have to account for those as well. Now, what I would say about these figures is at the point that this projection was prepared, we're just now starting to work on the 25-26 budget request. So a lot of these numbers are really preliminary estimates. By the time we get to our November meeting, this projection for account one may change a little bit because we'll have better information about what those specific budget requests from those other agencies are. So for example, like the Board of Control from the State Engineer's Office, they're preparing their budget request now. By November, we'll have a better idea of what that's going to be exactly. Same thing with our match for the drinking water state revolving fund program. This Office of State Lands and Investments, they'll have a better idea of what they're going to ask for that match by November. So we'll be able to update that. So when we account for all of those estimated non-project costs, which added up in this case to roughly over $27.5 million, that leaves us a 2-year figure in account one of $27,198,217. And so we typically would look at conceptually approaching that as splitting it in half for the coming funding cycle and then half for the year after that. So that would leave us, roughly, what's the math there? Just over 13 million for this year.
Yeah, 13.6.
In account one. So now I'll move down to.
Critical
Yes.
question, Commissioner.
Thank you. I'm just asking because I have a lot of questions actually on this whole section. And so as we go through. In 2021, our account had a balance of 34 million. And now we're down to 27,198, even with the infusion of 6 million from the legislature. And the State Engineer's Office, the Board of Control was at 14 3, and now it's 16.4, and the office itself is at 9,200,000 versus 8 million. So I'm just wondering, we're seeing large increases in the costs, and I'm just concerned. I know that we were trying to get the board of control the state engineer's office out of our budget. And I just wondering, how do we protect this and preserve it when I'm seeing a fairly substantial decline?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Anselmi Dalton, you're absolutely right. We've been talking about this for a while now, that we think that there is a risk to our funding from some of these non-project administrative costs that are being funded out of Water Development Account 1. And they continue to increase. A portion of those agencies' administrative budgets are personnel. And we've been fortunate enough as public employees the last couple of years to be granted market pay increases. And so those are reflected in some of those budget increases, as well as I would say, oftentimes those you'll see in those generally funded agencies, those budget requests will increase over time as costs and material and services needed to run their program may increase. We've also been dealing with inflation like everything else, right? So definitely those budget asks are increasing. And you're right, we're seeing a downward trend of the cash available, the balance available for appropriation in Water Development Account 1, because those non-project costs are going out the door quickly.
David, I'd also like you to just comment out there. I think most of us are, when I first saw that figure, I said kind of the same thing, and we're going the wrong direction on a lot of this stuff. We got not just the same amount of money, but much less money to do much more work in. And we're going to have some hard decisions as a commission up here, and they're going to start this year. And I know the office is working on, maybe some solutions that might be able to help us out, but we all better be prepared for it, because I haven't seen this since I've been here. I don't know about Larry, but since I've been here, I haven't seen these kind of numbers so low. So we're going to have some hard decisions. We're not going to be able to approve everything across the board, and we're going to have to dig deep to find out what are the best projects to move forward and move forward with those projects. And it's going to take some pretty unique work from the office to vet them for us, because of course we rely on them and trust them so much with what they delivered to us, that they're going to have to really do some decent vetting to bring those projects forward to us and make sure we understand what's going on with them, so that we can approve them and move them forward. But I just wanted to make that comment to make sure that the new commissioners realize, we haven't seen this in a long time. So we've got some things ahead of us that we're going to have to make some hard decisions on. Just wanted to make sure everybody realizes that. Do we have a question,
Senator?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, I have a comment.
Senator? Yeah.
Obviously, we've been battling this for, I don't know how many years now, 4 or 5, but it seems like we go over to, I'm in the Senate now, to the other side, and we get beat up every year on using account 1 to pay for our state engineer's office, Board of Control specifically. But we talk about this every year. I hope we're still trying to get our people that are getting these funds to make sure they're contacting their legislators. And I think we've tried to make that a requirement. I'm not sure if that it is a requirement, but every time these entities that are getting funds contact their legislators to let them know how vital these are, we need that. And every time when we're discussing our budget, we need help to try to convince some legislators that these dollars were spent or put there for projects. They weren't here to fund a constitutional agency. So anyway, I wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman,
Speaker.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think it's very fair of what the senator said, that the hangups in the House, I was on appropriations when we did this. and it was because we needed money. And I think when and if the time that our revenues are good enough, then I think you'll make that case better. And hopefully it'll depend also on the agency, right? Is the agency going to put this in their budget, a change of the color of the money? And so then that discussion will be played out. And I think what's also important is you all need to lobby, you might say, those members of appropriation, particularly on my side, to convince them of the need. And so as you guys have that ability, you're not the agency, you're the board, so you can advocate for this stuff. And so that's my I guess that's what I would ask you all to do if you think this is important. It's probably, and certainly I don't discount that constituents aren't going to matter as well, your local communities and that sort of thing. But it'll just come down to where's our revenues? And is this the time? Is this the next budget to do this? And that'll take some work by you all because they can't do that work.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to respond to that, just an update. And I think we talked about this a little bit in May, was that had conversations with the governor's office. The governor's office is supportive of that idea to take Board of Control out of account one back into general fund, which is where it typically would live. And so have also talked to state engineer's office, who is supportive of this idea, and plan to take that up with Joint Appropriations Committee at our budget hearing in January, with state engineer's office right next to us, and see how that goes, because that was some of the direction we received last legislative session when the Select Water Committee put that change in one of our omnibus bills that didn't go over so well. So we're going to go through the appropriate channels and see how it works out this year. And I think we'll have a pretty good argument, because I'm anticipating once we get September 1 applications in for construction, along with the planning project applications we've already received, that we're going to be short of money. We've been able to kind of get by up until now, but this is kind of when the rubber meets the road. We did get that influx of money that's going to help. But in future years, I don't think we can depend on that. And we're going to have to live within our means, and we're going to have way more requests than we have funding to get projects done. So, I just want to give that update. We're planning to go down that path.
Thanks, Jason. Speaker Summers, I also, I never thought about, thanks for reminding me, never thought about I thought maybe I wasn't supposed to approach the legislator for once from our program, but if you could give us a little more guidance on that sometime, or get somebody in touch with us on how we might want to do that, I'd be willing to sit down and meet with several people and talk about how good this program works and how good it is for the state. So if you could help me out with a little, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman. Well, Mr. Chairman, you've got one of them sitting right here, right? And so he's going to be hearing this conversation. And then I think ultimately you get the chairs and you get 2 or 3 of you, right? You can't be a quorum probably, or whatever that is. So whatever gets you away from that, but get a little representation around the state and sit down and talk about the projects. I'm not going to say you're going to win the argument.
No.
If the Craig is bad, you probably don't win that argument. If the Craig is good, you stand a lot better chance. But if you don't sit down and talk to those folks directly, you're not going to gain anything on the House side. I can tell you that.
I appreciate that advice. And Senator?
Since I was outed by my good speaker colleague, former member of appropriations, I too would urge you, I would urge you this year is an important year, given this funding balance, but this year we've got 2 advantages that'll help you in that quest. One is with ARPA dollars, we're going to be redeploying a lot of dollars. And so there's going to be some money floating around that can be used in areas that may not serve this function, but it'll free up dollars that could. And so that's, we could swap, put ARPA dollars in areas where the guidance shows we could use them, then that may free up some general fund dollars that could come this way. And the other thing I'd mention is that right now the Craig does look good, and it looks like it's going to be a little bit better. So those are 2 things that are happening this year that may not be happening later. So yes, and feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to help. and get you in front of the folks that, whether it be when we working in December and January, when we're going through the budget after the governor gives us to us the week before Thanksgiving, then we'll be meeting in December and January to put it together with a goal to getting it in front of the body by, before the February 12th, before the start date. So that'll be the time.
Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, this is just thinking out loud, and I don't know your fund structure. But in lieu of changing those from water development to general fund, if there is some one-time dollars, is there a way to just do a 2-year, whatever you would have got out of that, right? Is it 15 million, 20, I can't remember. It's
Mr. Chairman, Speaker, we're talking about 16.5 somewhere in there. We don't really know the specifics because of, like David mentioned, the raises and benefits and things associated with that with the Board of Control employees.
So nice round numbers to 17 million. If you can't get that, have an option 2, which is, do you have some one-time dollars you could put in there for the 2-year period of this budget, not change the structure that exists, but at least get you the money that needs to be there. So I think you got a couple of options. You just got to think about that. Let water development think about that. And just think of more than one ways to skin the cat.
We appreciate that. We will. I know there's a couple of guys that'd be probably happy to be on that little group to meet with the senators and representatives and give them our case for sure. And we can probably get a little bit more insight through the office on how they feel about everything as well. But we know, I just never have seen that number so low. And I'm like, how are we going to do this? How do we break it up? And we're going to have some tough decisions. And that's a Senator Larson's question. I'm not sure where we're at on making that a requirement or not for people asking for funding, if they have to have a letter from their local representatives. Did we ever do anything with that?
Mr. Chairman, we've talked about that in the past. We've not made it a requirement.
Okay.
I don't know if that borders on lobbying or not.
Yeah.
But it's one of those discussions we should continue to have. We encourage our sponsors to make sure that their local legislators are aware of their projects and understand them so they can support them during the session. But an official letter, we haven't taken that step.
Is there any way that we could, in their package, give them a form letter that they write their comments on it and we send them in? I don't think that'd be lobbying, but
In regards to having the legislators write their comments on it?
no, having the people write their comments on, how the process worked and basically kind of grade us, and hopefully it'd be as positive as I think it would be. And at least they would be getting that kind of information that,
Yeah.
Hey, we had this project. It's a great project. It went through the office very well. And, I appreciate the commissioners and Select Water for all the work they did on it,
Mhm.
just those kind of comments going to those representatives, got to have a little bit of a way on it. So
Makes
maybe
sense.
there's
We can
something could do.
Have some more discussions about that. and
Yeah,
see
let's
what
do
we can
that. Okay.
I would like a clarification. So the 16.4 million that shows is, I assume, being transferred or in some manner going to State Engineer's Office, Board of Control. Is that statutory? What policy or rule or law, what is being used to make that happen?
You want me to? Sure. Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Craig, so that really comes out of the standard budget request from the State Engineer's Office. So and it was used as a budget balancer during a time of revenue shortfall, as the speaker alluded to. So when money was tight, they looked to Water Development Account 1 to help fill some of that gap. And so that comes in the form of a budget request from the State Engineer's Office. And it just puts Water Development Account 1 as the funding source. So it comes right out of our account. We're typically not a part of that budget hearing. We're not a part of that budget planning process. Of course, we have a good relationship with the State Engineer's Office. And so we get information from them and work together with them. But we're not technically involved in that process, and it's not statutory. It's not a rule per se. It's just part of their standard budget request.
So that was part of the reason I asked that question was Director Mead mentioned having a conversation with the governor about that. And it seems to me that in some regards, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul with this. And so the money was appropriated for water development, and yet now state engineer's office is using that money. I really think it needs to be scrutinized and addressed. If it's water development money, I firmly think that it should stay with water development. And maybe some other source of funds be found for state engineer's office. And if Director Mead, is that the direction you were trying to go with your comment earlier?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. And we had these discussions last year with the Appropriations Committee when that same request, instead of through the budget process, was put through the omnibus bill. And explained to them, water's not water. It's just not a general thing, right? We develop water, rehabilitate water projects. State Engineer's Office Board of Control is regulating water, two different things. So water is not water. So we tried to tell that story. I think they understood that's what they had to do in the past to, balance the budget. Maybe things are better now. Back in 2017 or 18, I think it was general fund that funded the Board of Control. And I think back to like 2002. So 2002 to 2017 timeframe, it was out of the general fund. There was a time period from the early 90s to the early 2000s where it was out of account one. And I think before that was probably out of general fund. So it's just been depending on revenue stream like Senator Greer has talked about. So.
And Mr. Chairman, a policy choice from the bodies making that decision, right? So they evaluate the best way to invest those state dollars. Those budget requests start through the governor's office and then to the Joint Appropriations Committee and then onto the full legislature for approval.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would anticipate when we come out of the governor's office with our budget and the state engineer's office budget, that it would show Board of Control out of general fund, and then it'll be up to the Joint Appropriations Committee to either concur with that or not. Yeah.
Any other questions? Anybody?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner?
I just want to follow up on that. Is that their total budget that we're supporting, or is it a partial? Or do we know that?
Mr. Chairman, it's the entire Board of Control budget,
The entire.
salaries, building, rentals, vehicles, I believe, everything.
So we're total subsidizing that. Well, I think we just gotta get a bill or do whatever we gotta do to get this planned out. The other thing, when you look at our financials here, the other thing that's a real deal that we need to really pay attention to is inflation. It's a pretty simple name, but it's here. And it's here in all of our projects. It's here on our dollars. It affects our financial status today dramatically. And I yet don't know what we can do about that one. I think it all comes from somewhere in our total government, I suppose, but it is critical. And I think we're going to see more of it, not less. It's going to continue. So just a couple of items of interest that I'm concerned with.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick response to that. That's kind of the story we've been telling is the funding through the water development or for the water development program obviously is funded through mineral severance taxes. The account we're talking about right now is 12.45% of a dollar amount that's capped at 155 million. So if there's 500 million worth of revenues that come into the Wyoming through Craig, it's still capped at 155 million. If it goes down below 155 million, then it's 12.45% of say 100 million, if that's what the revenues are, right? To the mineral severance distribution account. And it's been like that. Those percentages have been like that. And in this case, the $19,297,500, the top line of the taxes received, that's been that number since 2012, the same dollar amount, same cap. And really, if you look at the revenues into the different accounts, it's been like that since back to about the early 80s. And so, yeah, we were flush with cash back in the early 80s and, 90s. And now where we are is our revenues remain the same. Inflation's gone up, our buying power has gone way down. So we keep telling that story.
Commissioner, any other questions? Anybody else questions? Okay, why don't you go ahead and move on, David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So moving on to page 9 now, this is Water Development Account 2. Same process, a little simpler because we don't have all the other programs and initiatives that are funded out of Account 2. Account 2 honestly has been pretty historically stable because we've been subsidizing it or propping up with Account 1 and transferring, and in the past occasionally Buffalo Bill as well. So those transfers have allowed Account 2 to be fairly stable. The balance available for appropriation, the 2-year number for Account 2, $10,526,014, and that's a 2-year figure. So roughly we would plan on spending or appropriating half of that coming into this session. And then on to the next page. Just 1 minute to catch up here. Same process for Water Development Account 3. Again, I'll call your attention to at the very top in the FY23 revenue. That other line includes a very generous infusion of one-time funds that we received for Water Development Account 3 last session. That $46,688,043 figure. A good portion of that are those one-time funds from the general fund. So that, as we get down to the balance available for appropriation, apologize, just 1 second here. My copy is moving awfully fast. There we go. Okay, so that leaves us with a balance, a 2-year figure of $61,062,212. The other thing that we wanted to call out in this year's projection for Account 3 is a little bit unique. The Big Sandy Reservoir enlargement, and Jason could talk more about how that actually ended up being funded. But we had some state dollars appropriated there. They weren't used, so that is now wrapping up, and so that Account 3 money is able now to revert back into Account 3. But because that happened after June 30, it wasn't recognized in this year's figures. But we wanted to call to everybody's attention that those funds will be available in Account 3. That reversion will be recognized this fiscal year. So technically, if we needed it, we would have up to $69,462,212 available to us in Account 3. That's a 2-year figure again. So roughly split in half for this coming session.
And Mr. Chairman, I would just a few little details on Big Sandy. If you recall, we originally appropriated about $8.4 million for that project. Since then, we were able to fund the projects through the Upper Colorado River Fund or Basin Fund MOA, which we're actually going to be talking about here in a few minutes. So the funding came out of that instead of Account 3. So that 8.4 million will revert into Account 3 here shortly, or probably has at this point, since it's after July 1. The other thing, just generally before we move on to the next topic, would be in the past 2 years, we've spent probably $30 to $31 million between our planning and our construction projects. This year, we're going to have between Account 2 and Account 1 and 2, roughly $18 to $19 million to spend. So it's going to be significantly different than the past 2 years. Okay. So if there's no more questions on that, we can move forward to the operation and maintenance accounts.
Yeah, let's go ahead and move forward.
Okay, so we're on page 11 of the PDF. And for those that were here during the Select Water Committee interim topics, we actually discussed some of these a little bit, but through the state of Wyoming, through the Water Development Commission has reservoir assets, I guess, in 10 different, well, we have 10 accounts set up through legislation. We actually have 9 set up as operation and maintenance accounts. And each year it's through statute, it's the commission's responsibility to review those balances and make sure there's not funds that should be reverted or put into Account 1. If there's excess funds that we don't think we need in those accounts, we can transfer them to Account 1. At least probably about half of those accounts have that set up to where we can do that. So this is just really a memo from myself to the commission. And it talks about, again, in the bullets there on the first page, it are each one of the accounts that we have reservoir water. And then what we do to look at this is we look at a 10-year transaction history. So what are the revenues and the debits out of each one of those accounts over the last 10 years? And then we also do something similar for the future 10-year look into the future to kind of get an idea of, is that account stable? Is it going up? Is it going down? Do we need to do anything with it? So if you were to, and then we put together a kind of a conclusion recommendation section that says what our recommendation is to the commission on those different accounts. You want to jump ahead 2 pages. Guess that would be page 13 of the PDF. This is just an explanation of each one of the reservoir accounts. And I'll just show you Fontenelle real quick so you have an idea of how it's laid out. So Fontenelle Reservoir, this particular account was authorized in 1989 legislation and talks about the original appropriation to set that account up. The source of funds was Water Development Account 2. The typical expenses, and we talked about this again in Select Water Committee meeting, was our portion. We have 120,000 acre feet of contracts in Fontenelle Reservoir. The total, I guess, volume in Fontenelle Reservoir is 345,000 acre feet. So we have a proportionate share of the annual operation and maintenance costs that Bureau has. They pass on to us. So that's one of the expenses. And then we're also still either on our last payment, I believe. We have a 1962 contract and a 1974 contract. Both were for 60,000 acre feet. That's how we get to the 120. And we're making our last payment on the 1962 contract, I believe, here shortly. So that expense will go away. And then typical revenues, as we talked before lunch in Select Water Committee, we have 5 different third-party agreements with industrial companies for more or less backup water in case there's a curtailment on the Colorado River and their direct flow water rights were to be called out during regulation, then they can call on the reservoir water to replace that. And they pay a readiness to serve fee just to have that water available. And there'd be an additional fee on top of that if they ever took delivery of it, which they never have at this point. And then they also pay their proportionate share of the operation and maintenance costs that are passed on to us from reclamation. So, and then we also have water in Buffalo Bill, Palisades, and so on and so forth throughout that list. Onto the second page describes all of those different accounts. I don't know that we need to go through them individually, but then if you want to jump forward to two pages to page, I believe it's 15. I'll just give you an example of where we look at the 10-year look back and a 10-year look forward to understand, are those accounts stable or not? So yeah, we're on page 15. You'll see there the revenues. You start looking down through those, and all those revenues, or a good majority of them, are based on these third-party contracts that I just mentioned with the industrial companies. And then the expenditures are, if you look back farther, is where we have the where we're paying for that 1962 contract still. And at some point we were still paying for the 1974 contract. And then we also have the O&M expense through Bureau of Reclamation. So that would be page 1. And then if you move on to the next page of the PDF, that looks at the future projections of expenses and revenues out of that same account. And we kind of take history. What have we been paying? What are the averages we're paying for operation and maintenance? Put what we think might be inflation onto that for the next 10 years, the same with the revenues, and then project out what the balance of that account might look like in 10 years. So in this case, we're at roughly $5 million with that account. It does drop from where it is now a little bit. But one of the reasons it does that is because we're planning to use some of the money out of this account when we move forward with the riprap project to riprap that lower face of Fontenelle Reservoir. A portion of that money would come out of this account. And we project that could happen in the next 10 years. Okay, and then you see at the bottom of that page where we have our 10-year look forward at the conclusions and recommendations. Fund is stable with no excess funds available at this time. And then if we determine that there were excess funds available, the statute reads that with legislative approval, the excess funds could be moved to account 1. Okay, so we do that through every one of our accounts. We can look at Buffalo Bill real quick if we want. Because that,
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, I just had questions and I'm just going to kind of go over them in general so you can, or either you could address them. For example, I feel like we have figures, but let's take the Pathfinder. The Bureau Reclamation average OM&R is 8,100 in 2021, and now it's 11,700, for example. Okay, so you see in 2023, it's gone up higher than 5%. But if you look at the Glendale Reservoir account, the OM&R is 4,300. Now it's 4,600. So it's just like 4% or 3%, but the other one's a higher rate. I just wonder, I don't feel like we're being consistent when we're changing these figures. For example, we used to have investment income at 2.5%. Now we're at 1.5%. But then we sell our water purchases at the same price as before for like $2. We're not raising our rates, and maybe it's contracted. Same with the contracts with the people that buy out of Fontanelle, our Trona, things like that. They contract with us, but that rate fluctuates. It was 564,000 in 2021. In 2022, it's 497,000. In 2023, it was 532,000. And maybe what I heard you say was that they have to pay a share of O&M, and maybe we've just had that fluctuating. That's why it's fluctuating, because I would assume the contract prices are stable. I know you said there were 2 contracts, but I don't know that we're consistent always in OM&R. And is it because the different areas are more expensive, or should we be kind of trying to be more consistent throughout? And also, as we go forward, trying to raise our rates to some of these users where we're kind of seeming to keep it flat while everything else is hitting us with higher prices.
yeah. And Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Anselmi Dalton, you're exactly right. Operation and maintenance expenses from the Bureau of Reclamation change from year to year, depending on what they have to do. So that's why those fluctuate. In regards to our third-party contracts with Fontanelle, those every 5 years, we look at the consumer price index of when we sign that contract to the consumer price index of today. And so every 5 years we do that, and then we adjust what they pay per acre foot if they were to take delivery of that water. So those are increasing with inflation, CPI being the base for that. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, but why are we changing the interest rate to lower, instead of doing the 2.5%, even in the other account, when we did I think it was account 1, maybe we had 2 million of interest income and we went down to 1.5 million now, which is odd to me. We're seeming like we're getting less when we should be hopefully getting more.
Let me take that.
You can try it.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think if I'm understanding correctly, you're referring to our projected investment earnings rate. And what we do is we rely on the Treasurer's Office, and their consultants produce a quarterly report based on a 5-year look back of investment earnings, performance, and history. And we take that 5-year average and use that for our projection. So that unfortunately has been going down the performance of those investment dollars. So we use that 5-year rate and in the state agency pool, and that's where that figure comes from.
Any additional comments, questions? No? Can we move forward?
So, Mr. Chairman, we'll just real quickly maybe cover Buffalo Bill or talk about that briefly. Buffalo Bill, we talk about this every year. A portion of the enlargement of Buffalo Bill was paid for by the state of Wyoming. We also financed the modification of the power plant, and we financed that with the Bureau of Reclamation. So we get a pretty good revenue stream coming in from that. It was 11% interest rate that goes through 2030. So we get about $2.5 million a year of revenue from WAPA into Buffalo Bill. So that account keeps building. But this account also is the account that we have utilized in the past as more or less our budget balancer, not only for the other reservoir operation and maintenance accounts, because we're going to have these responsibilities for operation and maintenance in perpetuity, as long as we own this water or have this water in these accounts and, or the dam goes away, which hopefully none of them fill up with sediment and we can continue to maintain them. So when an account starts, trending down, we typically will use Buffalo Bill account, and we have some of the projections like High Savory, over the years, we're gonna have to replace gates and the SCADA system upgrade and things like that. So we also have in our projections forward that at some point, we're gonna have an infusion of funds where we need to transfer money from Buffalo Bill to High Savory to prop that back up. And then we've also used Buffalo Bill in the past for kind of a revenue or budget balancer. When we've got more projects than we have ability to fund, we've moved some of that into account one or account two. Account one, and then transfer it from account one to account two. And I would anticipate there might be a need to do that this year as well. So even though there's a healthy balance in Buffalo Bill, I don't think it makes sense to just send it all into account one at this point because of what I just said. In addition, that's also going to be a source of fundings when we need to riprap the face of Fontenelle Reservoir or Fontenelle Dam. We're going to get the majority of the funds from Buffalo Bill and transfer them into Fontenelle. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner.
I just want to comment, though. There's only 7 years left on that loan. Once that's paid in full, that revenue source goes away.
That's right.
So you're saying that us commissioners should want to leave by 2030?
Well, so our 10-year look forward goes to 2033. And we're saying the balance at that point will be 32,731,000. And that will be the end of it, because as you see in 2030, that's the last payment of that $2.5 million. So, yeah. Okay, so if we jump back to the second page of my memo, more or less just is where we have all our conclusions or recommendations, and what they all say: Fontenelle, Buffalo Bill, Palisades, our miscellaneous water investment account, High Savory. We say everything is stable, no funds or no excess funds available at this time, so no need to transfer. And really the same thing for Pathfinder, Glendo, Lake DeSmet, and Middle Piney. The exception to those is there's not currently a statutory provision to allow us to move excess funds from those accounts. But I think that's fine at this point until we see a need to in the future. It hasn't been affecting us. So I'd say with that, if there's any questions.
Director, I just was questioning. I thought we did a new water lease agreement for Palisades in 2021, or maybe it still doesn't show on this draft that we have that water lease still going on for Palisades, but I assume that is continuing.
Yeah, there should be a revenue. I think it was $170,000 in the
Okay.
Palisades.
It just
account.
didn't show it under the revenue sources, under the summary part, like it did before.
I can point it out if you.
Does that agreement end soon?
Nope. I can't remember exactly how long that agreement is. I want to say 10 years, but don't quote me on that. But if you recall, there's three priorities with that 33,000 acre feet in Palisades water. The first being compact, making sure we're abiding by the Snake River compact. The second one being propping up flows in Jackson Lake or the river below. And then the third being being able to lease water to the Idaho Groundwater Association. And I think it was 2 years ago, we leased water. This year, as I mentioned at our May meeting, we've got new operators at the Bureau of Reclamation, and there's been some odd years, I guess I will say, where a lot of water ended up lower in their system in American Falls and Palisades, and Jackson Lake was near minimum pool. I don't know, it was quite low. And if they spill water at another dam called Milner Dam lower in the system, then they're more or less wasting storage water that they could have stored. So they requested that we use our 33,000 acre feet to prop up the flows out of Jackson Lake Dam this spring. And fortunately, it didn't, they were able to shuffle water around enough and manage the system where there was no debit of our account. So we're pretty much full again. But that created a lot of conversation around the state and nationally. So it's going to be fresh in people's minds next year when we're faced with the decision of, are we going to lease some water or are we not to the Idaho Groundwater Users Association? We'll have to think about that hard. Okay, so any questions on the reservoir operation and maintenance accounts?
Questions, anybody? Thank you.
Okay. That's if Barry could come up. He's going to give you a quick update on our project consultant selection process and how it's going. And this is on page 31. Yeah, tab B or page 31 of the PDF.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Barry Lawrence, Deputy Director of Planning Commission, Select Water. Pleased to be here to talk to you a little bit about consultant selection and where we are in the process for our planning projects. As indicated, if you could look at the first page behind tab B, you'll see the planning project funding approval and consultant selection schedule. You've seen this before. This is a 13-month process. I'm not going to belabor the point. We went into a lot of discussion on this at our May meeting where we went through the various steps. But just to recap, it's a 13-month process from applications coming on March 1 all the way to notice receipt on the backside with consultants in April the following year. So it's a 13-month process, which includes site visits, project recommendations, consultant selection to include statements of interest qualification, RFPs, pre-proposal site visits, proposal submissions, selection team rankings, interviews, all as such that a consultant is selected with a budget amount prior to getting into the legislature. In other words, our new process, we call it the new process, we've been doing it a lot of years now, is to go through the entire consultant selection process with our planning projects such that we have a consultant selected and then a budget for that project based on what the winning consultant submitted. And those come in and sealed envelopes, the costs are not considered till the day of the interview, actually. But those marry up, and then we know we have something to hardwire into our planning bill going forward at the November meeting. That's where you hear about the final budget. So for that process, the old way of doing business, just to refresh those who haven't been around as long, was where the office set the budgets for those planning projects. But we heard loud and clear several years ago from the commission and Select Water that we'd really like to have it such that whatever the market will bear. And they thought it was going to save the state additional funds at that time to do that, to go through the process, the full consultant selection, have that done before we get in the legislature. The old way of doing business, the staff, based on our years of experience, set the budgets, and then we'd be into the legislature at the same time we started consultant selection. So we didn't issue RFPs until we were out of the legislature, but the funds then were based on the budgets that we set. That was the old way of doing business. So what we're talking about today is the 13-month process, the new process, which, as I said, we've been doing for a number of years. So if you move to the next page and you'll see, and this is kind of recap, refresh your memory where we are at in this process. Listed at the top of the page are the projects that are going forward. There are 19 projects. We discussed every one of these projects at our May meeting. If you remember, we actually had the sponsors come and we debated some of the projects. Matter of fact, we had quite lengthy discussion on some of the projects. And we originally started with 23 projects. And just to remind you, 4 of the projects fell out one way or the other. We had 2 projects, the Laramie Master Plan, which is recommended no funding. Lake to Smith, also no funding at the director's recommendation. The Owl Creek Test Well project was folded into the Hot Springs Supply Evaluation Project. And then Sinclair, we talked about Sinclair. They wanted a master plan, but we've got a current Rollins Water Master Plan we've just started. So the idea being folding that into that with the existing consultant. So that's how we got from 23 to 19 projects. Those 19 that you see there, and you see also the commissioner assignments, as we always do. We have 2 commissioners assigned to those. Those haven't changed. And so that's when we began consultant selection in earnest. You gave us preliminary approval to start the selection process, which we did. Immediately thereafter, and what we're asking the consultants at this point is to give us statements of interest, statements of qualification on those projects. So we advertised 4 successive weeks in the Casper Star Tribune. We also put it on the state procurement website. We also put it on our agency website, and then we maintain a distribution list of consultants that we emailed it out to. I think there's about 200 different firms and entities on that list. So the 4 different ways we get the word out. These firms had 1 month basically to submit their statements of interest, statements of qualification. If you scroll further down on that sheet there a little bit, Megan, you'll see that the timeline schedule, they had to get those into us by June 23rd, 1 o'clock. And they also, at the time, also had to put in residency certification forms, and that's part of the process. And we use state statute 923-105 to do this. It's very spelled out, the process that we use. And one of the things that is residency consideration. So ideally, we'd like to come up with 5 firms for each of the projects. That's always, a lot of times it's not possible. We don't get that many submissions per criteria based on the statute that we were supposed to look at is ability of professional personnel, past performance, ability to meet time requirements, location of the firm, current and projected workloads, volume of work previously awarded, and equitable distribution of contracts from among firms considered qualified. And then also I mentioned the residency considerations. And there is an affidavit that we have our consultants submit if they want to claim residency status. I think it's worth going through a little bit. The AG's office helped us with this. The affidavit basically asks the firm, and they have to attest to this, that they're legally registered and in good standing within the Wyoming Secretary of State office, that they possess a physical office residing within the state of Wyoming, staffed by qualified individuals with professional and technical expertise are employed in the state. And then thirdly, if the firm is selected for the project, it will ensure that an applicable percentage, and then I will tell you the percentage is 50%, of the contract cost for professional services as set forth in Wyoming statutes shall be performed by individuals or consultants who are employed in the state of Wyoming, who will perform their labor or professional services provided under the contract within the boundaries of the state of Wyoming, and who shall possess the professional and technical qualifications necessary to perform the work required by the contract. So that is the statute, and that is what, if they are going to claim residency status, and they submit it with their form, with their information, their statements of interest, statements of qualification. Those came in, and then, as I mentioned, ideally we'd like to get to 5 if we can. But based on the statute, if we receive one credible Wyoming firm, it's got to be a credible firm, qualified firm, then we are not allowed to look at out-of-state firms, and they're eliminated immediately. Okay, and we can talk about the legislation and so forth doing that. So if we scroll down to the next page, you'll see in the short list, you should have seen that we developed a short list. And this was sent out to the commission. This is based on that criteria that we just talked about, was sent out, and based on that, and you'll see there's actually 5 firms, 5 projects where only one firm came in on those projects. We did get firms on every single project, but there, as I mentioned, 19 projects. So the next page shows you some factoids, and I always put those together to kind of explain the situation and what's going on. And it's actually this year, it's a 9-year summary. And at the top there, you'll see the number of projects, number of submissions, a number of different firms. The number of projects, those are the actual planning projects. As I mentioned, we started with 23, we're down to 19 now. Those are the 19 that are going forward this year for the 2024 projects. 43 submissions we received. That means if one firm comes in on 4 different projects, that's 4 submissions, okay? They have to submit separate packages for every project they want to chase. So we received 43 submissions, and then also of interest, 16 different firms. And you can see over the past 8-9 years, what's been going on with that. In this case, number of projects were up over 3 projects from last year. But submissions only up slightly, 43 versus 36. Number of firms, we actually went down 1, okay? But you can see some real changes there. And you see the old process versus new process, the old process being where we set the budget again. The new process being where we go through the whole consultant selection before we get into the November meeting. So we know what the budget will bear, basically, what the winning consultant puts forward. The other thing I will call your attention to is in 2020, the legislature approved House Bill 51, which changed it, looking at out-of-state firms versus in-state firms. And in 2020, and it went into effect, ironically went into effect October 1st, and basically used to be the previous legislation said that if there were 3 firms, credible Wyoming firms, we were not allowed to look at out-of-state firms. That was changed in 2020 to 1 firm. So if we got 1 credible Wyoming firm came in, we were not allowed to look at out-of-state. So that happened in 2020, House Bill 51, as I mentioned. Interestingly enough, it went into effect in October 1st. We were already past the shortlisting phase at that time. And per the AG's recommendation, we were able to continue on. So where the change really went into effect, you'll see the numbers there, a number of different firms in 2021. And we were selecting for the 21 projects, 2020 legislate 21 projects. So where the change went into effect, where you see it dropped from 29 to 16, that's where that new legislation went into effect. Just to give you an idea, a number of different firms. If I look at the current selection this year, as listed there, you'll see that we had, as I mentioned, 5 projects with 1 firm that came in. I should mention, if we only have 1 firm come in, then we still do the full-blown consultant selection. We follow statute. We do RFPs, proposals, and so forth, and interviews. We follow state statutes that way. We also, though, had high of 3 projects where 4 firms came in. And so you can see those, you can see the projects listed where we had 4 firms come in. Average submissions per project, you can see 2.25, basically about the same as last year. None of the submissions per project, but a few years ago, you see we had more than that. We usually had over 4. So by firm, you can look at it the other way. If you look at by firm, you see we had 3 firms chasing 1 project, 5 firms, 2 projects, 4 firms, 3 projects, 3 firms, 4 projects, and we actually had 1 firm chasing 6 projects. So it was more of a shotgun approach in that particular case. Here again, average submissions per firm is about 2.7. Last year was 2.1. Okay. After completing this shortlisting exercise, 42 of 43 submissions were still standing. There was only 1 that was eliminated in the shortlisting, and all 16 firms are still standing in this process where we are today. Okay, at least they still have 1 project that they're in the hunt that they haven't been eliminated from. And then it's 100% of all the firms in the hunt right now are Wyoming State firms. We have no out-of-state firms. This is the same as it's been for the last couple of years. Okay. So that having been said, if you go back to that second page where we had the projects at the top of the page, the black line there on that page indicates where we are in the process. And as mentioned, RFPs went out Tuesday, July 11th, after we had the shortlisted consultants. Those proposals were due in our office this past August 10th, this past Thursday, and strictly adhered to. We had to have those proposals by that date, and then we sent them out to the selection teams. And for the commissioners that are here, we have your proposals, bundles of proposals for you to take with you. And but the rest, everybody else, we sent those out to the sponsor. I should mention on the selection teams, typically 5 on the selection team. It's a sponsor, obviously. It's two water development commissioners that have been assigned. You've seen that list. And then we usually have somebody from our construction division, and then potentially an advisor or so forth. But we have 5 on the selection team. And even if the sponsor brings 2 or 3 people to the interviews, they only get 1 vote. And that's the way it's been set up. So going forward, I will tell you that next, and during that period, we had the 1 month, as I said, for those proposals. We did do pre-proposal site visits. Hopefully the commissioners, you were invited to those and got emails from the consultants or from our staff. And so now we have the proposals, and then in separate sealed envelopes, the cost proposals. And those won't be, divulged until the day of the interviews, so that you're ranking your proposals not based purely on costs. Okay. So right now where we're at, you have 1 month to review those proposals, and the deadline there is highlighted in yellow. I've got it highlighted. Friday, September 15th at 5 p.m. You need to get your rankings. Those of you who are involved in these selections, get your rankings to Megan, and she will come hunt you down. I will tell you if you don't have them in. We have to have those because consultants are waiting. Waiting to know whether they're going to get interviews or not. And so we notify consultants the next Monday there, and then they have about 2 weeks to get prepared for their interviews. Interviews then, that's the last page in the packet. You see the schedule for the interviews. They are actually 2.5 days of interviews. We try to make it as compact as we can. Obviously, note that there were 2 or 3 projects that fell out. Also, there are 2 or 3 consultants that fell out on some submissions and so forth. That having been said, it's about as compact as we can get it. The first afternoon, Monday, October 2nd, we'll be doing those in our offices in Cheyenne. And then the other 2 days, the full 2 days where we have morning and afternoon sets of interviews, those will be done at the Capitol Extension in the rooms down there. So, and they're concurrent interviews, as you see, and you'll see the teams and the makeups and so forth. So we'll go through that process 2.5 days. And then the following day on October 5th, Thursday, October 5th, that will be the commission meeting where the commission will approve the selections. So I kind of ran through that pretty quick, but if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Barry, I have a question for you. With our dollar shortfall that we are seeing this year, some of these projects are going to be in jeopardy. Would it be safe to assume that?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, we've certainly as senior staff have talked about that situation. We realize that. I will tell you, there have been some years, and one of the ways we've addressed it in the past is we've made it depending, and of course, not knowing what we're going to get in the door on the construction side of the house, that makes a big difference too. There have been years in the past where we've made them contingent on transfers of funds, whether it be from account, 1 to 2, or whether it be from Buffalo Bill or something like that. We've done that in the past. Obviously, from a consultant standpoint, they've spent a lot of money trying to win these jobs and then not knowing, if you have some caveat in there, whether or not we're actually going to have the funding. That's one of the reasons they're not crazy about our process, is because they go through the whole thing and then still have to go get the money. The old process, as you remember, We were
Right.
into the legislature and we didn't issue RFPs until we had the money. But those are based on our budgets and not from the consultants, the winning bid.
So most of the firms, we can assume kind of understand that then.
Yeah, I
know,
would think
it's
so,
been
Mr. Chairman.
A lot of time and money on that. I hate to
Mhm.
bring them that far along and then
Right.
dump them off. So.
Mr. Chairman, if I could expand on that too, I don't think
Sure.
we've had to do that in the past.
I don't remember it. but-
I'd like to see a commitment to stick with the planning projects that we've approved in May because of the fact, and I'll just point out again what Barry did. That's the Professional Services Procurement Act. That's the 923-105. It used to be a different number, but actually in 2019 or before 2019, it was really wide open. Our office used to, if we didn't have 5 in-state firms, we would fill that 5 out for each planning study with out-of-state firms. So it was very normal for us to see 5 firms and 6 or 7 or 8 or more sometimes apply for the projects, and then we'd have to narrow it down to the best 5. And then like Barry said, in 2019, it went from wide open, as many out-of-state firms, in-state firms as you wanted, to if you had 3 in-state firms, then you couldn't consider out-of-state firms. And then in 2020, that got narrowed down. If you had even 1 in-state firm, you couldn't consider out-of-state firms. So that's really discouraged. We really don't see out-of-state firms even submitting statements, qualifications, and letters of interest at this point, because they know they really have no chance of getting these projects. And as Barry and some of his factoids, I like to call them. We had 5 planning studies this year where we had one consultant put in, and I think it was 5 or 6 or maybe 7 last year.
Mhm.
And I think we had 1 or 2 last year, 1 at least that didn't have any.
One
firms.
didn't have any, yeah.
And I think when you look back at the summary page in 2018, we had the same number of studies as we have this year. And in 2018, we received 91 submissions, and this year we received half that, 43. So we talked about this at the orientation back in May, if you recall. And I remember one of the Select Water Committee members is saying, how can we help? And one way you could help would be to look at that statute 923-105 and see if it doesn't make sense to open that up again a little bit to where we can get some more competition putting in with consultants, out-of-state consultants putting in our planning studies.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'd like to know also what the practical effect of that is. Are you seeing costs being driven up because there's no competition? Are you seeing the work? I mean, what other effects are you seeing besides just having one bidder? Obviously, competition is a good thing in most cases, but could you explain that a little more?
Well, it's a little bit hard to tell because during that same time period, we also went to not setting the budget for a study. It went out to what the market could bear. So I feel like our scopes for master plans and level 2 studies are pretty tight. We know what we want, and it's worked well for us in the past. And we will get consultants now that interpret the scope differently and give you the Lexus versus another consultant that gives you the Toyota, right? And I think a portion of that comes from, well, they're trying to sell their proposal and, oh, we can do all these things for you. And you don't actually see where the rubber meets the road until you open up that cost proposal and realize, oh, well, that's $100,000 more. Is it worth it to us to get that additional value or go with the more standard scope? And when we were setting the budgets, I think one of the complaints was, we had a $300,000 budget. Everybody would come in at $299,900. Well, that was because we had the scope and they were giving us exactly what they could give us for that scope. And it was a lot more consistent on proposals and what different consultants were providing rather than getting these wide ranges, in my opinion. So I don't know if we've seen, necessarily a drop off in consulting. We really appreciate all the Wyoming firms that put in on these. But that's another one of the reasons why I don't want to see when we make a commitment in May to a project and then we pull that in November. That's just going to be another discouraging point to these consultants in state that are willing to put in our projects at this point. They may decide, well, if we're going to go spend $25,000 or more putting our proposals together, getting all these teams assembled, and we get the rug pulled out from underneath us and don't get the project and lose that money, is water development a good place to be, investing our time to chase projects. So.
We have another question over here.
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman, if I may. First, to answer Senator Steinman's question, yes, there's no question that at least in the Southwest Wyoming area, as it relates to contractors, et cetera, the value, or more importantly, the cost of doing business is much, much higher because the limitation, or more importantly, the lack of competition is driving that up. And I would like to reinforce Director Mead's comment that this is a systemic issue throughout the state. I'll just speak on behalf of Southwest Wyoming, but our inability to attract contractors is impeding our ability to compete, to expand, to do a number of different areas, whether it's just regular maintenance. So not only within the water development area, it's also extremely important as we recognize this moving forward. It's hurting our ability to compete as a state, let alone as a nation, when we can't get competition, specifically in contractors or consultants, et cetera. So thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Sorry, Hicks.
when I just look at the data, there's not enough information up there for me to make an informed decision. So the number of submissions without listing whether those were in-state or out-state contractors doesn't mean anything to me. You could just have the exact same ratio, because what we've seen is a consolidation within the consulting industry. You know that I can give you about 3 different firms that have been bought out by a bigger organization and a bigger organization and a bigger organization. So the simple fact is there's just fewer consulting firms out there, period. That's one issue. The other issue is when we look at, say, let's take 2018, it says number of submissions, there was 91. How many of those were in state and how many of them were out of state? I don't know. It may be the exact same ratio as 2024, where we had 43 submissions. It could be the same number of in-state and the same number of out-state. So, I mean, the raw data still doesn't lead me to the conclusion that it's an issue of not being able to attract out-of-state contractors. It's just, is it contractors overall with the consolidation? You know, you and I both know some of these firms have been bought 2 or 3 times from the traditional ones as that consolidation. And they've gone out there and they've bought up a lot of different firms. And so part of it looks to me like it's just an overall availability problem. The other side of it, I think it's the statute's doing exactly what the legislature intended it to do, was give in-state contractors a preference. It's state tax dollars. And quite frankly, a lot of people don't like to see that money go out to big firms out of state. Because then our little guys don't get those contracts and then they go out of business. And so I don't know what the answer is, but maybe it's doing what it was designed to do. It may be limiting people. I can't believe that 5% differential is the reason that we're only getting 1 submission. I'm not convinced of that.
Mr. Chairman, that's just on construction.
What's that?
That doesn't apply to planning. That's just construction projects.
On the construction side, that's right.
Bid preference, yeah.
So what's driving it on the planning side? Is it just lack of firms overall?
I don't know that there's enough work in Wyoming necessarily to make your home office in Wyoming. To where you can say 50% of the work's going to be done at a.
So you're talking about the provision that they have to have an office here.
Well, the residency requirements, yeah, to claim residency, yeah. I would agree, yeah, firms are consolidating. We've not seen a lot of times in the past where we've only had 1 firm submit on projects. Usually it's multiple. And in the last 2 years, we've had 5 or 6 that have only had 1. So that's some pretty good raw data there, but I would agree. And I would agree with Representative Conrad too. I think some of the bipartisan infrastructure law and all the work that's out there probably has some impact on it as well.
Well, and I was going to say, that's not any different than the construction. The engineering side is not any different than the construction side. We just went through this with the reservoir up here in the basin where we only had 1 bid. Right? There's a lot of money that's been dumped on this economy that's fueling inflation. And I'm just telling you, a lot of this is being driven by circumstances that I think are outside of whatever legislative, that we've done with having an office in here. There's just a lack of construction firms. There's probably more work with consultant firms. than they can possibly handle. We've heard that before, not bidding because we've got all the work we want. And so I don't know by tweaking those statutes, it's going to change this. That's my concern. We go in there. I'm not convinced that we're going to convince our colleagues either, because that was a pretty hard fought battle on the Appropriations Committee by our local contractors to get those provisions in there on both the construction and the residency requirements. I'm not saying it won't, I'm just saying it is a big lift to go back and change that at this point in time for this program without having broad consultation with our school construction, our state construction, our highway construction. My guess is you're going to see the same trend with each one of those. We're seeing that with school construction right now, just lack of people bidding. It's just too darn much work with all the money out there. So,
Mr. Chairman, I understand the situation. Just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention. We're obviously not getting out of state firms that we used to, and that's apparent, but so just information.
Commissioner?
On a slightly different topic, but related to our bidding list here. And it's maybe just an update or a reminder for myself. What's the status of the conveyance loss study? Were we going to rebid that within this group, or is it in this group and I'm just missing?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, it is in this group and we received one consultant interest. Same consultant as last time.
Any more questions or comments? Senator Hicks?
same consultant, same price, even though we've reduced the tasks and the scope.
Mr. Chairman, we haven't opened those yet, so we don't know for
Okay,
sure.
thank you.
And we appreciate that consulting, putting back in on it. Let me tell you, we take all of them we can get.
Hey, Barry, should we move on?
That was it.
Are you done?
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. That report.
All right, Mr. Chairman, the next item on the agenda is operating criteria. And we're actually going to have you jump forward to tab F, which is page 55, running on to page 56 is where the actual information starts. So the criteria we're talking about today is the operating criteria for the Upper Colorado River Basin Fund Memorandum of Agreement. And I guess just a short bit of background here. In 2011, there was a memorandum of agreement signed between Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Wyoming, the Colorado River Energy Distributors, WWDC, and the Bureau of Reclamation. And what that provided was a framework for the expenditure of a percentage of the collected hydropower revenues. And those could be then used by reclamation to, and I'm reading this because I don't memorize this, but further purposes of the Colorado River Storage Project Act through the application of those revenues to the costs of implementation of projects recommended by non-federal parties. So what that means is they provided some of the WAPA or the hydropower revenues, power revenues back to the 4 states, Upper Colorado River states, for use in projects that were either participating projects or initial projects. And we only have participating projects in Wyoming. One of those would be Fontenelle. The Steed Skiddy project is what that's known as. The Eden project would be Big Sandy, Eden Reservoirs. The Lyman project would be Meeks Cabin State Line Dam and those irrigated acres associated with those. And this, the MOA was set to originally expire in September 30th of 2025. They renewed it in October of 2020 and extended that effective date through September 30th of 2037. And in addition, they added some additional funds on an annual basis that's collected from WAPA. And then that's distributed out amongst those 4 upper basin states for projects. In 2015, the state of Wyoming legislature gave the authority to the Water Development Commission to review project applications that came into this program to then provide on to Bureau of Reclamation for funding. And you guys have been doing that ever since. So the original intent of the change in this criteria was very simple. We had a call with somebody looking at potentially wanting to apply for this. And I got to looking at the criteria and it still said that applications were due by April 1st of each year to be considered at the June meeting. And we don't have a June meeting anymore. So I thought, well, that needs to be changed. So that's the simple part of it. And then as we were going through the criteria that was put together years ago, we thought, well, it makes sense to update it considering now we have the MOA 2 that doesn't expire until 2037 and language associated with that. And then really just some grammatical updates here and there. So we can walk through that if you'd like. On page 56, really, we're just recognizing the fact that that MOA 2 was signed in October of 2020. And the rest of that red language, we have this laid out similar to a legislative bill. So everything underlined in red is what we're adding. Everything in blue strikeout is what we're taking out. And that paragraph there where you see quite a bit of red, that's just explaining what the MOA 2 did. It more or less preserved the revenues from the rest of MOA 1, which was through October of 2020. I'm sorry, from October of 2020, when MOA 2 was signed onto the end of that first MOA 1, which was September 30, 2025, and then extending and adding additional revenues through September 30, 2037. So that's really what that does. Some cleanup there. We were saying Green River or Little Snake River basins or rivers, and just some cleanup. Similar as you move down the page, just reference to the 2020 MOA 2, put together an acronym there that wasn't quite spelled out with Colorado River Storage Project. On page 2, same thing, just reference to the October 1st, 2020 MOA 2 signing. And again, getting to, I guess I'm on page 58 now of the PDF. At the top, the application process. That's what originally caught my eye of where this MOA criteria need to be changed a little bit. So now we're just saying, instead of applications being due by April 1st, we're saying they can be received on a continuous basis, as long as they're submitted 45 days prior to a scheduled commission meeting, then we'll consider them. So it just gives potential applicants more opportunity to come to the program. And then really the other change is in regards to the effective date, and that's on the last page on page 59. And we're just referencing what came out of MOA 2, and that's the effective date instead of being July 1st, when new projects can be authorized of 25 to 2037, and then the effective date, like I mentioned, 2037. And then if there's funds, you basically have until 2047 to expend out those funds. And at the Thursday meeting, we'll be asking for your approval of those changes in that criteria. So I just wanted to bring it up today, make Thursday a little bit shorter if possible. So any questions?
Any questions? Select Water or commissioners?
And like I mentioned earlier, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Big Sandy is an example of a project that was funded through this MOA funding. So it saved state dollars, which is a good program.
Thank you.
Okay.
Welcome, Bill.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, the next item on the agenda is project updates, and we've got one project update today. This is Levitt Reservoir Enlargement Project. This is not the Alkali Creek Reservoir project that some of the Select Water Committee members had a pre-meeting about yesterday. So I want to make that clear. Levitt Reservoir. This is the project that was bid that we've referenced a couple times this morning in other discussions in, I guess it was January of 2022. So with that, I'll kind of hand it over to Bill to talk through that. And that's why we also have the Shell Valley Watershed Improvement District contingent behind us. We appreciate them coming today and give them an opportunity to talk here in a minute.
Chairman, Commission on Select Water, Bill Brewer with
Water Development Office. Just to run through kind of quickly on the Levitt Reservoir, the original construction funding was appropriated in 2017. It was for $41 million. And that was a $39,319,000 grant and a $1,681,000 loan. That budget was adjusted in 2020 based on design at that point. And that added another $5 million in grant, bringing the project up to $46 million in available funds. And then the project was bid in bids were open in January of 22. We only received one bid at that time. It was roughly $70 million. Through negotiations with that contractor, we were able to get them down to about 66 million. Which would have necessitated us moving about 30 million from sponsors or the contingency funds over to the project. It's kind of pointed out that moving that much money from contingency to a project budget may not be considered transparent by the legislators. So we decided to end up rejecting that bid and going back through legislation to move that money from the contingency fund over to the project through the legislative process. So at the end of that, there was a current funding available of $78 million, which was a $76,284,000 grant and a $1,716,000 loan. The project was rebid in July of 2023. We did receive multiple bidders this round. However, the original low bidder, sole bidder, did not rebid the project. And the overall project costs are higher than they were at that time. The sponsor has a plan that they would like to present to you to move the project forward and see if they can get some advice, buy-in on their plan to move this project forward. So I'd invite Kevin Minninger with our JH Consultants forward to explain that plan, and I'm not sure if anybody else from the district wants to come forward or not.
Welcome.
Thank you. So with the available 78 million that Bill mentioned, the district decided to we're trying to figure out how to make this work so that we can build the project as economically as possible. And so our current proposal would be to award currently the project was bid as 4 separate contracts, which was different components of the project, and that we would award 3 of the 4 contracts with the existing money, and that would lock in the existing bid price for that. And then we would delay the award of the 4th, or reject the bids on the 4th contract. So that would allow us to begin construction this fall. And then once we have the 3 contracts awarded, then we would be able to work with those contractors to try to identify any kind of cost savings on those 3 awarded contracts. And we would then pursue additional funding for that 4th contract that wasn't awarded, and with the hope that we could rebid that next spring. So yeah, so that was essentially the idea is, we would like to move forward with 3 out of the 4 contracts at this time.
Mr. Chairman, I just might remind everybody too, this is the project. Oh, it's been a long time ago since we toured it, but up in 2015, I think we had a tour up the Worland country and went up north of Shell, Wyoming, which is where this existing reservoir, 643 acre feet, since been breached. We're now enlarging that to about 6,600 acre feet. The 4 components, when this was originally bid, it was bid as one bid. There was thought that with some value engineering and splitting this bid up into 4 different bids. And also the 4 bids are the dam embankment, the borrow area for the dam embankment, which is right across the county road, the supply pipeline that gets water from Beaver Creek into the reservoir, and then a transfer pipeline that picks water up out of Beaver Creek, goes down through a low spot and actually can get water up into the Shell Canal. And so the 3 bids that I think they're proposing to award would be the borrow pit, the dam, and the supply pipeline. Put off the transfer pipeline until they can come back for additional funds on that.
And then the only other add on to that is assuming it's going to take several years to build the dam. And so if we were able to move forward with that 4th contract for the transfer pipeline, we could still get, even though it wouldn't have started at the same time as the other contracts, it could still be completed at the same time and not necessarily delay delivery of water.
Mr. Chairman, I might add too, my concern that if we don't move forward with this project, this will be the 2nd time we haven't moved forward with this project. And eventually I think contractors are going to get fed up with this and just stop bidding on the project. I think that's my major concern. The other thing I would say would be, again, this is a good project, the economic benefits of the project. We're looking at 124 million roughly in economic benefits, depending on if you use a 2.5% discount rate. If you use a 1.5% discount rate, those go up to closer to 142 million over the life of the project. And we're looking at a project cost of around 84 million, I think. So I think the benefit to this area would be great. And the other thing I'd like to point out too would be when you look at our criteria for the water development program, not only do we have account 3, the dam and reservoir program, where obviously development of new water and storage is the top priority, but in account 1, the number 1 priority is level 3 projects developing new storage. So obviously it's important to the commission, and it's been important to the commission in the past. So I'd like to see this project move forward, but I think we need some feedback or some thoughts from you guys. And I'd like to give the Shell Valley Watershed Improvement District a chance to talk to what this would mean for their community to see this project move forward as well. So you guys like to come up and say anything?
Yes, Director, I think it's a great project. I'm sure all of us would love to hear from Shell Valley. Thank you,
folks.
please.
We thank you for your time. My name's Kent Johnson. I'm a member, and there's a lot of guys on the district who are far more qualified than I am to talk to you. I'd like to thank Jason Mead and Bill Brewer. These guys have been just fantastic helping us along. This project's been going for quite a while. This is John Ed Anderson. We got Fred Barnett. John Ed started this project, I think, in 2008. We're getting close to the finish line. We'd like to get started on this thing. As you can imagine, folks are getting a bit antsy. We were lucky to have a little bit of water this spring, but it's dry in Shell Valley. Another thing I think that's important to remember is what we're paying every year with the state, what you're paying every year for crop losses on these places. I don't know the exact number, $200,000 a year. We want to get going on this thing. And we're confident that if we get A and B started and D, and we can come back around and make up what we need for contract C. So it's important. It's going to benefit that valley. It's going to benefit the state of Wyoming. And I don't think there's anything more important, especially right now, with what's going on the Colorado River and all that. Watch that water go down and straight into Montana with no beneficial uses. Not the way we want to go. So I appreciate your time.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner.
I guess I'd like to know the importance of this transfer pipeline. Can you explain why you can operate the rest of it without the transfer if you had to? In other words, if you don't find funding for the transfer pipeline, what element does it have? Is that your outlet works? that sends the water downstream so it can be utilized? Or how important, I guess, is this
I'll try to take.
in the operation of the reservoir?
I'll try to take a quick crack at it. If not, Kevin can come up. In this case, the reservoir is about a mile upstream of where this transfer pipeline is. So the three bids we're looking at is the inlet pipeline, which would bring water to the reservoir, the actual dam embankment, and the borrow pit to borrow the materials for all the construction. At that point, and it would also include the outlet works of the reservoir. And at that point, the reservoir dumps back into Beaver Creek. And the water flows down Beaver Creek about a mile, about 6 miles, I guess, to where this transfer pipeline picks it up and then takes it off to the individual ranches and Shell canal to be distributed to all the shareholders. So like I say, there's about a 6 mile separation. And the idea would be, and I'll probably have Kevin come up to kind of split it up a little bit. Some of the shareholders could be supplied directly without the transfer pipeline. However, not all of the shareholders could be supplied without the transfer pipeline. But we could store the water that we're looking at storing and send it downstream to some of the users. However, we would not be able to supply all of the users until the transfer pipeline was developed.
So this is a brand new reservoir.
Brand new. Well, it's replacing
There is one close to that, isn't there? Or
there was one.
was one?
That
Okay.
dam has been breached to dry out the site for construction.
Mr. Chairman, might also add, so that was like a 643 acre foot reservoir that a couple of landowners have water in, right? Water rights. And when we were talking with them originally about, hey, dry land is good land for constructing new dams on. We provided them an idea of how to drain that with the siphon. And like any good farmer rancher, they did a more efficient process and they got the backhoe out and they breached it. So that was great when we thought, we're just going to go to construction next year. And then COVID and inflation and everything else hit. So even if we didn't move forward with this project, we've got a small dam to rebuild. And that small dam, the way it was built before, wouldn't be able to be built like it was before. Back in, I don't know when that was built, 1950 something, I think.
A follow-up. So the portions of the items, there's 4 items here. What is the portion or the percentage of your total 78 million dealing with the transfer pipeline? What is that portion, I guess, that you can award?
It's about 20% of the bid price, the total bid. It's 14.6 million was their bid for that.
About 14 million. What size is that pipeline too?
It's a 36 inch pipeline. And it's about 3.5 miles long.
Okay, 3.5 miles.
Mr. Chairman, currently, I think we're about 7 or 8 million short to be able to bid or to award all 4 contracts. And I think the hope is once they get if they were to move forward and award these 3 contracts, that they can negotiate with those existing contractors for actually moving forward with a bid price and find some value and some savings there, which would hopefully then draw down what we're short. Instead of 7 or 8 million, maybe we were, I don't know, pick a number to then have a better idea what they need to come back for additional funds.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, we want to thank you guys for coming in today and being very passionate about your project and bringing that before us. You got something you'd like to add?
Yes, we'd sure like to get going because our bids are only good for 60 days. So either have to rebid it or something. So kind of up against the wall there.
We appreciate that. Let us know that as well. Thank you for coming.
I'd just like to say that I don't think if we don't start now, I don't think it'll ever happen because inflation is eating us faster than we can obtain funding. And we're also working on grants and to try to get some grants, and we don't seem to fall in the right criteria every time it's been done, but we're still working on it. Thank you for your time.
Appreciate you looking at that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner.
I just have a question about how many acres are served or will be served if everything is completed, including the
Chairman.
transfer pipeline?
Well, in total, there's about 18,000 acres. You guys have a number on the acreage in Shell Canal?
We got 144 users on it. Shell Canal, total acreage. I don't know, I can't remember, but it's around 17,000 for the whole thing, for the upper branch.
So about 17,000. When you have storage, is everyone able to irrigate right now, at least one irrigation, or where are you at with that?
Depends on the seniority of your water rights. You get dry after the middle of July, you're down to nothing. And one of the benefits on this is late season crop. That'll be available. They haven't been able to do it. That ranch is not gonna make the investment if you can't finish it off.
So the reservoir that was breached, or the dam that was breached, that reservoir served about how many acres?
There are only 2 users, to my understanding, two water rights on it.
So this project really is probably, I don't want to say new, but it would certainly serve a whole lot more people and acres than was ever
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
previously
It
served.
increases it tenfold,
Yeah.
6,600 from 600.
Thank you. That answers
And,
my questions.
Yeah, it's gonna make a big difference.
So, Mr. Chairman, am I hearing any major concerns about the district's desire and intent to move forward with the 3 contracts and come back to water development, most likely for account 3, additional account 3? We just covered the account 3 balance and status of 61 million and potentially a little bit more once we get that reversion from Big Sandy. We heard a lot of positive comments, I guess, last legislative session from on the floor about how they want to support reservoirs and more storage, and they'd like to see more of that come in front of them. Hopefully that they'll back that up this year. So I would expect in November, if the district were to move forward with this and award those 3 contracts, we would have some kind of additional request come to the November meeting out of account 3 for this reservoir
Mr. Chairman.
for that 4th contract.
Excuse me, Jason, but I just had a follow-up on that. Yeah, I think it's a great thing. I think should be done. I guess the risk, you always got to look at the risk. And I'm kind of a risk taker myself. But what happens if they never find the $7 million to finish the project? I guess that's your risk, right? You've got everything in place, you lack some money, and you lack that pipe, that's outflow, or the transfer pipeline. So I guess that's a risk. If you got it, you got it. If you can find it, but risk is risk. So what do you do if you don't find the funding for that, I guess? What is there an alternative? I know you talked about negotiation with contractors. What if that fails? What if you fail trying to get additional funds somewhere? What is your plan? What would happen if you did? You just failed on those elements. Got a third thing you can do, or run without it, or what do we do?
Mr. Chairman, I'd heard that there was some discussion about if they couldn't serve the Shell Canal, they would look downstream on Shell Creek, where they can physically just by gravity release that water into Beaver Creek, which then flows into Shell Creek, and look for additional beneficiaries down there that might be interested in shares to pick up some of that cost of a loan eventually. I don't know what else.
We could also, there's also possibility to build a partial portion of the transfer pipeline with the funding we have.
that would supply some of those shareholders, but it would not get to all of them. So
Okay.
there's some options there to do a partial transfer pipeline and go downstream farther and trade, basically end up swapping shareholders from some of the current ones, but it's not a preference, but there is some possibilities there of other users.
And I
Thank
believe,
you.
yeah, I believe Chairman Steinmetz has a question as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few questions. One, are all the easements secured and that's all ready to go?
Yes.
All right, just checking on that one. And then secondly, can you break out, I apologize if I missed it, just all of the 4 contracts? What are the totals? You've told us what the projects are, but what are the total amounts for each one? And if I was trying to find it in my e-notebook and for some reason I'm having trouble. If you could direct me to what page we're on that PDF file or.
Page number?
It's
Mr. Chairman.
39.
Sorry. Mr. Chairman, we won't have any of that detail in the notebook.
Okay,
And part of that is these are open bids.
okay, okay.
So
So maybe you could send us an email.
Well,
Could
we
you
can
do
talk
that?
about it because it's already been in the newspaper.
Oh.
So it's no
All right.
secret.
Well,
Um,
if we could talk about it, that'd be great.
So, Mr. Chairman, contract A is for the dam. And the bid on that is 36,400,000 and change.
Okay,
The supply pipeline, roughly 8.6 million. The borrow pit is roughly 18 million. And the transfer pipeline, which is the bid that they want to forego now and
defer,
requested, yeah,
right?
defer,
Mhm.
as roughly 14.6 million.
So if we approve the top 3, then we'd still be on the hook for 14.6 or possibly more.
Mr. Chairman, that's where it was, if they can award those contracts, then they can go back to that contractor and negotiate the price and see if that contractor has some better ideas than the engineer had, which is likely. You know, I like to give Kevin a hard time.
How did that bus tire?
So maybe we can find some cost savings there. Right now, I believe it was $7 or $8 million short of being able to award the entire project. So right now it would be 7 or 8 million that we're short on that transfer pipeline. So of the 14.6, we need another 7 or 8 to cover that. And then if we can find some cost savings, I should say that the sponsorship can find some cost savings, then maybe that would go down to a lesser amount that would be needed.
Okay, thank you.
And there may be some escalation in their bid price from one year to the next, just like there was this past year.
Senator Hicks?
Yeah, that was pretty much the same information, but did this save us, what was the potential, let's call it potential savings by breaking this into 4 contracts versus the original bid? What was the differential there?
The original bid was, well,
70.
go ahead.
Yeah,
Well,
so
right
the original, excuse me, the original bid was 70.3 million. So and then we rebid it a little over a year and a quarter later, and it was 77.6.
So it went up 4 million, yeah, and you're attributing that just to inflation.
It went up about
increase in
10%,
cost for
which is-
materials and.
Any other questions, Senator?
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, from Bill or Jason, so what do you want from us in the today or tomorrow on this?
Mr. Chairman, I just want your reaction to, I guess, the sponsors' desire to move forward with, I guess, awarding part of this project and not having funding in place to award the last piece of the project. And because that's essentially what they're proposing to do, I think. And then, like I said, you would expect us to be back in November with a recommendation in front of you, most likely for that additional funding that would be needed to then rebid that last transfer pipeline contract.
And the question would be, do we have that additional funding? And
Mr. Chairman, account 3 currently has 61 million in it. Again, that was from that influx of funds last session. And then we're expecting a little bit more from the Big Sandy reversion. So there would be funding available.
I think I can support that. It's not a vote here, but just an opinion.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Representative.
Close enough.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about the cost of the project. Is this a typical cost that you'd see for this many acreages being irrigated and this kind of money is typical? I mean, do we do the analysis to figure out, say, cost per acre? Because it's astonishing to me, the price of these projects. And I just want to know what normal is. Could you help me out with understanding if this is within the world of reality or normality? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb. I don't know if there is a normal anymore. When I say that, every site's different. Every reservoir site, this one has its unique challenges because of the clays that we're dealing with at the site. So the dam can't be as steep sloped as you would typically. It's got to be laid back because of the weak foundation, I guess. And then when I say not normal that way, but also not normal in the fact that COVID's never happened in this inflationary environment. We've never seen it before. So I don't know if I can give you a better answer than that. When I look at it and say, is it a good project? I fall back on the economics, which is why I pointed that out. It's, benefit cost ratio greater than 1 means it's a good investment of dollars, right? The benefits outweigh the costs. And this would be anywhere from 1.4 to 1.7, depending on the discount rate you use. So in my mind, that's good. And that's based on a 50-year life. I would expect this dam to last longer than 50 years, 75 to 100, but we've used 50.
Okay, do we have any other questions from Select Water or the commission? Okay, if not, we can move on. Thank you. Thanks again.
All right, Mr. Chairman, our next agenda item is the USGS Wyoming Stream Stats release presentation. And I think Barry will start it off for us. Mr. Chairman, everybody's good. Don't need to take a break. Okay.
Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute quick break.
Okay.
Yeah. Real quick.
Site.
Yes. Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Barry Lawrence, Deputy Director for Planning. I'm pleased to be here with Jason Alexander, hydrologist from the USGS in Cheyenne. We're going to talk to you and provide you an update on effort that's been going on for several years now with the USGS to develop a StreamStats application for the state of Wyoming. And for those of you who don't know, StreamStats is an online analytical tool used for water resource planning and management. It can delineate watersheds, calculate basin characteristics, and provide stream flow statistics, not only at gauge sites, but ungauged sites. So it's a really neat tool. As I said, it's been in development for several years for the state of Wyoming. And our office's involvement in this goes back to 2018, 2019. Actually, the 2019 legislature funded this current effort. We have a contract with USGS that started back in October of 19, goes all the way through 2027. But we're at a real milestone today, and that's why we want to talk about this. And one of the reasons this was funded by the 2019 legislature in the planning bill was to reduce costs on our watershed studies, storage studies, in-stream flow studies, et cetera, because a lot of the information in StreamStats is kind of the underpinning of the foundation for a lot of our own work and studies. So with that, I'm going to bring Jason up here, and he's going to kind of walk you through the application and provide a demonstration. This is the first major release under this contract. It's now available to agencies, the general public. It went live, and Jason told me, I was asking when, he said June, right in June is when it went live. And folks are using it now. And I will tell you that in addition to our agency, that YDOT and DEQ and Game and Fish are very excited and interested in using this for their own applications. And then when we get done talking, we'll talk briefly after Jason's done and the demonstration and so forth. I want to talk briefly about a contract amendment that we have before you for in 2 days at our meeting. And what it is a joint funding agreement. It's just a modification of our current agreement. Currently, we are on a 60-40 split where Wyoming is paying 60%, USGS is paying 40%. I will tell you upfront and transparent that there were some cost overruns initially in the project, and those are now going to be picked up by the USGS. So no additional cost to the state of Wyoming. So what they are proposing is to kick in more money to make us whole, and it'll be now more of a 50-50 split, and that's what it is. No additional cost to the state of Wyoming, but that's a one-page little agreement to up their ante, pay more into the project. And that'll be what we'll be asking for approval in a couple of days. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason, and he's going to go through, walk you through the application.
Thanks, Jason. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Commissioners, thanks for taking time today, or giving me time today anyway, to talk about StreamStats. We're excited about this application. Hold on here. Close some things. Apologies if there's any juggling. I have to do this on my computer so that it's we know there's not going to be any problems. Okay, so shut this down. And then I have to share. Okay. So we have a bigger screen, so hopefully everybody can see all of this as I'm moving through it. Okay, so thanks again for having me. My name is Jason Alexander. I'm the Surface Water Studies Chief at the Wyoming, Montana Water Science Center at the U.S. Geological Survey. There's a whole team of people that work with me on this, including folks in the state. This has been a very collaborative project between the USGS and the state of Wyoming, including multiple agencies. And we're very proud of it. And we've made quite a bit of progress. And because it's rolled out in June, the first stage of this anyway, Barry thought it'd be a good idea to present here so you guys can get an idea of what we're moving towards and what it is and what you've been funding and what we've been moving towards. So with that, I'm going to start and just give you an overview of what StreamStats is. It's a set of spatial analytical tools used for water resources planning and management. So it's an online application. The common features that application features that it has for users are delineation of basins, computing basin characteristics, things like slope, aspect, land cover, elevation, precipitation, temperature. it retrieves stream flow statistics. So we all know that we have a network of stream gauges, both with us and the state engineers and others, and that those stream gauges are discrete places on the landscape, but of course planning occurs in other places. And so this application retrieves stream flow statistics for places that are gauged, but also ungauged. So it predicts. This is where it says solves regression equations for estimated stream flow statistics. And I want to emphasize that this is a national platform that is flexible and customizable tools for each state's needs. So it is, I will show you later where it has been rolled out. It is rolled out in 48 of the 50 states, but or is at least under development. And but it is flexible, so it does have different tools for each state, depending on the state's needs and wants. So I'm just going to back up just for a moment to give everybody some context for just planning tools. So when I started my professional career more than 20 years ago, the 7.5 minute quad was basically the fundamental basis for topographic and water resources planning in the United States. It had been so for more than 100 years. And you can see here, this is the 1952 7.5 minute quad for the Flaming Gorge quad. And you can see here in 1966, this is Flaming Gorge Reservoir superimposed on top of it. This was when I started as a junior geologist at a water resources engineering firm in 2000. Every engineer that I worked with, when we started a new planning project, either ditches or otherwise, or groundwater, we rolled out a 7.5 minute quad and we began our planning straight on that. So this is a fundamental tool that obviously 7.5 minute quads have been published everywhere and they've been used everywhere, and they are a cost saver. Having to go out and do your own topographic surveying for every project obviously would be untenable. So I just want to sort of start with that. This is where it kind of began. And when I remember my first basin delineations, they began by basically taking these 7.5 minute quads. You would piece them all together. You would clip them, you'd put them together, and then you would actually hand outline on a map what the basin boundary was, right? So this was all done by hand. And if you wanted to get the basin area, use a tool called a planimeter. And then if you wanted to, on top of that, get things like land cover, basin slope, soil types, precipitation, et cetera. These were all done by taking other pieces of data usually from some sort of hard publication somewhere, and interpolating to where these are at. So this sort of planning is done every day in the private sector and in the public sector in a discrete manner. And these days we're doing it with applications online. So here, ArcGIS, which is a proprietary software which you have to pay for, or QGIS, which is a geospatial, a publicly available open source geospatial tool, or increasingly open source programming tools. The user today goes out to the World Wide Web and obtains these in a sort of ad hoc fashion, right? So an individual user at either an engineering firm or consulting firm, or one of an employee at one of the state agencies goes out to the web and they obtain these pieces of data individually, bring them back to their PC or to their home server, and they interact with them and work with them in a way to do whatever water resources planning that they're trying to do. So whether that be reservoir planning or ditch planning or water supply planning, design for hydraulic structures, et cetera, these are all done with digital tools these days that the user has to go out in an ad hoc fashion and find. And this is just a quick example of something that we most recently published. It's just a map, right? But this was all done by basically piecing together all of these individual pieces of information and bringing them into a map. So what StreamStats does is it actually takes all of these pieces of information and publishes them and pre-processes them so that they're brought to the individual user. And it does so with data that are already published and checked. So these are quality controlled data that are pre-processed. So the user can actually go out for free and go to the web to StreamStats and obtain this information live without having to go and find these individual pieces themselves and build it in an ad hoc fashion. So you can imagine the amount of time that it takes to go out and find it and then come back. and build all this every time you want to go out and plan something on the landscape. In this case, StreamStats, this is all pre-processed. So just why is StreamStats advantageous in these ways? It's publicly available and free. Obviously, there's a cost up front that the federal government and the state of Wyoming is paying for to build it out. But for the individual user on the landscape, whether they be consultants or anyone in a conservation district or a state agency, for example, it is publicly available and free to them. It is no subscription cost. There are custom features for each state's needs. So obviously every state has their own individual water resources. They manage them in different ways. And so the platform is actually customized for each state's needs, and it is flexible and can be added on in the future. It has rapid access and processing. Like I said, the features are pre-processed, so we are able to go and interact with them on the web, and it's much faster to do so than to do that in an ad hoc manner at someone's individual desk. And the data are consistent, data and methods are consistent. So that is that you know what you're getting every time that you're using it. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily better or worse than anything else, but they're consistent. So if one user goes out and clicks on one part of the landscape, and I'll show you that in a moment, I'll give you a demonstration of what that looks like. If the users click on the same place in the landscape to get information there, they will get the exact same piece of information in the exact same manner and with method. As opposed to two different users getting different answers because they've approached it in a different way with different data sets. And it has the flexibility to update and expand. So there are lots of geospatial data out there, as we all know today. And most of the scientific data that we process is now at the landscape scale. And so this platform actually allows us to upload that data. And so it has the ability to act as a platform for new stuff that comes out, even if it isn't, for example, part of this, the Wyoming StreamStats project. The platform of Wyoming StreamStats can act as a place to access data and processing. I'll get to that in a moment in a bit more detail. And these are the things that I would like to point out, that the publicly available and free means that an individual user, someone in a small town, for example, that might be trying to start up a consulting firm, does not have to pay for access to this application. They can go to it online and access it without any cost to themselves. The fact that it's rapid access and processing means that someone can go out there and just get quick information about a site to make a quick assessment without having to spend half the day in the office building a GIS. And the fact that the data and methods are consistent mean that the quality control and checking is much easier. So StreamStats has been rolled out in 48 of the 50 states plus Puerto Rico and DC. You can see here, this map shows the green areas are where it's been fully rolled out and fully implemented. The blue states are the states where it's undergoing implementation. And in Wyoming, you can see we've rolled out the delineation basin characteristics portion, and we're working on the rest of the build out, and I'll show you what those are in a moment. So because it's a national platform, meaning that all of these individual states have all of these individual needs. I don't expect you guys to read all of these, by the way. I'm just putting them up here. There's a whole list of things of which this is non-comprehensive, that shows these are all of the things that can be added on depending on a state's needs. And so the red box here shows this is these are the core functionalities that are basically rolled out in every single state, that where you saw those in blue. That is basin delineation, editing the basin at site, statistics for stream gauges, ungauged stream flow estimates, and stream flow alteration. Those are pretty fundamental core capabilities of StreamStats. And those are certainly going to be rolled out in Wyoming. But because it's a national platform, there are other capabilities that get added on, because it provides an opportunity to add on calculations, for example, that are made, or estimates that are made at the national scale. It allows us to roll them out in Wyoming because of the fact that we need these inputs, things like basin area and stream flow, to make the estimates. So once it's rolled out in this base level form, other things can be added on. And sometimes these are depending on the application. For example, Prosper, which is the probability of stream flow permanence. It is a application that just predicts whether or not a stream is likely to go dry at a place on the landscape in any given year, given a set of conditions. That is a project that's been rolled out in the Pacific Northwest, but also in the Upper Missouri River Basin. And that was done with funding from various sources, but because, of course, Wyoming has the Upper Missouri River Basin and it's a headwater state, those applications just simply get added on to Wyoming stream stats at no cost to the state. So there's other features like hydraulic geometry, et cetera. I don't need to go into the details that get added on that are basically not part of the components of the cost that we're talking about today. These just come with it because they are national applications. So who's using stream stats? This is just some statistics about the usage that it gets. And these are for 2020. You can see that there's more than 300,000 sessions, individual sessions with stream stat in 2020. Even though it's not rolled out in every state, you can see states like Texas where it's not rolled out, or Michigan where it's not rolled out. There's still users in those states. And the reason for that is, of course, is because consultants do work in other states, and so do scientists in other states. So even though those states do not have it rolled out in their state, there might be users in those states that are using stream stats in other states for planning in other states. Pennsylvania, for example, you see there is very, very deep blue. And the reason is because Pennsylvania has actually implemented legislation that requires the state to use stream stats because of its consistency in its data and methods. I'm going to go through just quick in Wyoming stream stats. This originated really in a discussion with the development office in 2015. The current funding mix is 40% USGS, 60% Wyoming Water Development Office. It began with in 2018, 2019 with a pilot in the Upper Colorado region. So really just the entire Upper Green River Basin in the state of Wyoming. And really this began with just building the GIS base layers. So it seems fundamental that we have all of these individual digital layers that a person could go out and fetch from the web. Those don't actually work for stream stats. We use them, but we improve upon them and we make them more consistent. So it's actually the fundamental basis for everything else that stream stats does. All of its functionalities originate in this GIS base layer. So we did a pilot in the Upper Colorado Basin to start. And then in 2019, it expanded to the rest of the state. So now we have it fully rolled out for basin characteristics for the entire state. Some of this, by the way, will become more concrete when I show you the application. But so just to go through the fundamental components of stream stats and what it is in Wyoming. So right now it is GIS data and tools. So we have these stream networks, the basin boundaries, the elevation models, the delineation tools, and the basin characteristics. And again, basin characteristics are things like topography, temperature, precipitation, et cetera, land cover. The next component that we are currently working on is the at-site stream flow statistics. So these are all the stream gauges that are on the net on the landscape. We're computing stream flow statistics for those. So low flow statistics and peak flow statistics, for example. And then finally, there are regression equations. This is the predictive component of stream stats. So this allows a user to go to someplace on the landscape, choose, if it does not have a gauge, they can choose that site on the landscape, and stream stats will output predictions of stream flow for that site, even though it does not have a gauge. These are, of course, imperfect predictions, but they're predictions that someone would otherwise have to make by hand or on their own computer. It does this in an automated fashion. So these stream flow networks, basin boundaries, elevation models, and delineation tools, these were the fundamental basis that we started with, and they are, Barry referred to some cost overruns. This is really because it is the foundation for everything else. So for example, regression equations all have dependencies on the GIS data. So if we do not get the GIS data and tools correct, the rest of it doesn't work. So we spent quite a bit of time making that work, and we did so with partners. There were others at YGISC, for example, and State Engineer's Office and the Development Office that helped us build some of those and refine them. And those are all now rolled out. The basin characteristics, they differ from state to state, again, depending on state needs. And we pulled all of these agencies that you see in that yellow box to ask them what we rolled out an initial list of characteristics to see what would be most useful for them. And they pulled and gave us feedback on what to add some basin characteristics or tell us which ones would not be that useful. And these included things like stream flow duration, low flow frequencies, and basic statistics. These are things that analysts in both the private sector and the public sector use every single day. And so we wanted to make sure that it was most effective for the state of Wyoming. And so we simply asked people what statistics they would like to see. So the GIS data and tools have been rolled out. These are mostly the basin characteristics. These have been rolled out. These were rolled out in June. It's fully functional. I'll show you that in a moment. We have low flow frequencies and basic stream flow statistics at site, so at gauges. Those have been completed and are currently in review and waiting publication. And we are currently now working on peak flow and stream flow the regression equation components for low flows and stream flow durations. Those are currently underway. So some obvious potential uses for Wyoming stream stats are things like TMDL permitting, where a user needs to find out somewhere on the landscape what a particular low flow frequency is to apply it to a load analysis for a particular outflow from a particular treatment plant, for example. Fish passage is another obvious use. Stock pond design, when you're trying to understand potential runoff characteristics or basin areas to a stock pond, and things like infrastructure planning and design. All of this, the characteristics that you can extract from stream stats in an automated fashion are fundamental to every one of these. I think any consultant in the room could probably comment on that. So I'm going to quick switch here. That hopefully this isn't too clumsy to just show you what it is so that it's not abstract to you. Am I still sharing? Yeah, I am still sharing. Here we go. I'm going to pull this up. See if I can share the screen instead. Okay, so this is just, I'm in Microsoft Edge, and if I just type in stream stats to Google, it will bring me to the stream stats application. You can see a map of the United States there. If I zoom in on Wyoming, and I'll go to the Upper Green River Basin where I was before. Oops. Sorry, don't get dizzy looking at my zooming here. Apologies. So you simply select Wyoming because if it's on a border, the application is slightly different depending on the state you're in because it's been rolled out in different years. So the methods are slightly different depending on the state. But you get to zoom in, and so I can just simply select delineate, and I can click on one of these nodes. This in Wyoming, it's been rolled out at the 10-meter scale. And so that's about 30 feet, each of those individual dots. And it is currently doing a basin delineation for me. This is all done on the fly. We have pre-processed data, but it still has to go in and extract all of this data for us and delineate the basin. So it should take maybe just a few more seconds, hopefully. So this is the basin area now. So now we have this depiction of the basin. You can edit the basin, so you can just simply change this where the boundaries of the basin are for your individual project. You can download this directly to your GIS. This is something that, again, would have to be done in an ad hoc fashion and is done in a matter of less than a minute here. And I can continue on and go into the extraction of basin characteristics. Everything seems longer when you're in front of a bunch of people, but I can show you this is substantially faster than what would be required. Here we go. So basin characteristics. You can see these are bank full statistics and maximum probable flood statistics. These are regressions that we did not have to build
for Wyoming. These are done at a national scale, but all of the variables that are required to go into those equations are extracted from Wyoming stream stats and are now able to make calculations for Wyoming. So we can go in and we could select all of these basin characteristics. For example, some of these might seem completely obscure to you if you are not a water resources user or a GIS analyst, but it has all of these characteristics that you can then just go in and say that I want to select all of these. And it will go through and build a report and allow you to download the basin area as a GIS file with all of those basin characteristics attached. In the future, this will be able to also calculate regression statistics for anywhere on the landscape that you want for low flow statistics, for example, and allow you to do to select individual gauges to get peak flow analysis. But the idea here is that this is a tool that anybody can use. And so I can just now open a report and I can build, this is a report you can either print or it's just saved to your PC. You can customize it by a title and comments, etc. But you can also just download the entire shapefile, which most GIS analysts would take. This would probably take them hours to do to get all these characteristics, if not more than that, if not a good portion of a day to get at one site. This is actually just the online version. I just showed you a quick, one point on the landscape. It actually has a batch application, so you can upload, if you want tens and tens of sites on the landscape near gauges, and it can do it in batch format and pull all of that out in one fell swoop. So this is just one point on the landscape. A user, if they really wanted to say test a bunch of different sites for application for some water resources planning, they could do that in batch format. So with that, I'm going to leave it here and leave it open in case anyone wants me to do anything else with it. I can also go back to the presentation if you'd like, but I'm also happy to answer questions. And we have others here to answer questions as well. Peter McCarthy, for example, who's the National Stream Stats Coordinator. He is online and available for questions too.
Thank you. Questions, guys?
Mr. Chairman, just one.
Commissioner.
Just one question. Does this, I assume this does coordinate with the state's NREC system, Natural Resource Energy Explorer?
This is not interface, I believe, with that. I don't know exactly what tool you're talking about, but I'm not familiar with that tool. But
the state has a GIS layer system that anybody can access. I use it quite a bit working for Sweetwater County, and I just was wondering how these mesh.
These do not talk to each other.
Okay.
Yeah, this is on a federal platform, so no.
Okay.
It does use data though that was helped that YGISC, for example, helped develop. So when I say a lot of this is done in an ad hoc fashion, YGISC is where people get tools or get some of this data, but I'm not familiar with the.
So YGISC did develop this Natural Resource and Energy Explorer software, which is online and free to everybody.
Okay.
I was just wondering how they coordinate.
They don't talk to each other.
Okay.
Any other questions? Select Water, anybody? Well, it looks like a great program. A lot of work's been put into it. Yeah, we appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Jason, moving on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next agenda item would be sponsor contingency account requests, but we don't have any of those this meeting, so that's good.
Great.
The last item is discussion, and one of the things, we've got a couple of things we want to talk about. Hopefully we can be fairly brief, but the first one I want to talk about is just, at the orientation meeting we had in May, we talked about, I remember Representative Summers asking, when we have 10 master plans in front of us, how do we prioritize one from the other? And I think Commissioner Hosey brought up another question, or just the topic in general, prioritization. And we already talked about the funding we're going to have in the future and the need for that. So We've been thinking about that a lot at the office since the last meeting. And I think it's going to be, it's, when you get into it and you start thinking about it, it's not as simple as it might seem. Because we're going to have to balance judgment and decision-making and flexibility, and also maybe the need for scoring systems and, equity of providing funding to the different water users we have throughout the state. So how do we go about doing that is going to be a challenge. The planning, master plans, for example, maybe some of that's fairly simple, where you say, if you've never had a master plan, then you're the first in line for a new master plan. And we've got some things in our criteria too that say, if you're not an entity yet with commission exception, you can still get a level 1 reconnaissance study. Well, we may have to think about not doing that in the future, because if we have those entities that have gone through the process to form a legal entity compared to another one that hasn't, we got to draw the line somewhere when we don't have a lot of funding to go around. Another one is, in our criteria, we have criteria for the number of taps you have. You have to have at least 15 taps to be eligible to apply for a project. Or if it's an irrigation project, you have to have at least 1,000 irrigated acres. I know in the past, there's been some discussion about, oh, well, can't we, it's 750. Is that close enough? Well, when we have a lot of competition for dollars, I think we're going to have to be a little bit more stringent on that and stick to criteria. And then getting back to the master plans, are you comparing one that's 14 years old since their last master plan to one that's hadn't had one since, 18 years? Well, does the one that hasn't had one for 18 years get priority over the other one? And looking at, how have they implemented the projects that have come out of the master plans they've been provided, and the recommendations that come out of that? Have they been proactive and getting stuff done? And maybe it's only been 14 years for them. And do you penalize them and give it to the other ones who maybe they've only done one project out of the recommendation list? I don't know. But those are some of the things we're thinking about. And then when you start thinking about that, you also start thinking about, okay, well, if they've gotten a lot done through their master plans, obviously they've done a lot of level 2 studies and construction projects as well. So then you start thinking about, well, okay, equitable distribution of funding. Do you reward them and give them more, or then did you focus more on these other sponsors that haven't had a lot of success getting projects implemented? So it's not straightforward. Obviously level 2 studies seem to be more important than level 1 studies, because I think in today's environment, where it seems like every day in inflation, it's going to cost you more to do something tomorrow than it is today. So if it's closer to construction, then maybe it's a higher priority than something that's just starting off as a thought, and let's get our arms wrapped around the issues we have in our community. But if we've got, well, we know this is our number 1 priority, we want to figure out the best alternatives to address that, then that, maybe that's the higher alternative for the program. And that's just planning. Then you get into construction, you start thinking about things like, on a municipal side, are we looking at populations? I remember somebody throwing out, well, shouldn't we be benefiting the most number of people? Well, if we blindly just do that, we're giving money to the biggest towns. And I know there's consternation about that sometimes. So population, how does that play into prioritization and median household income, and what are individual sponsors paying for water rates? Are they, do they have a $20 water bill for as much water as you can run out of your tap in a given month, or do they have reasonable rates? How do we consider that? On the ag side, we've got large districts that assess themselves and maybe have better opportunity or more money in the bank to address some of their problems, and the smaller acreage or irrigated acreage districts. And how do you figure out that, and the assessments, right? You start looking at assessments, and well, this district over here is paying only $5. This one's at 25. Well, what crops are they growing? This one might be corn. This one might be grass hay. So that's not just a simple comparison, right? Maybe it's per acre foot instead of per acre. I don't know. And then some other things we've thought about, and this is kind of thinking through, do you develop some kind of a scoring system that where you're putting these inputs in, and then, not technically punching a button, but they get a score of 25 versus a 26. I think there needs to be judgment and, how critical is this project compared to that project when we're thinking about the community or the district. And then there's obviously how much money are you bringing to the table? If we want to make our state dollars stretch as far as they can, well, should we give priority to those folks that bring a 50% match compared to those folks that are asking for a 67% grant? And then like we did last year, we have to prioritize when we get to construction. We've got those projects that are coming in the door asking for dollars all the way through construction, but we know, hey, you're going to have to go out and get your easements in place. Easements is a dirty word today, it seems like, but have you gone through that process? Do you have your easements in place? Do you have your permits in place? Like last year, we phased projects, right? Go get all that in place. We'll fund you for that. Come back when you're ready for construction. So where are these different projects in the level of readiness to actually get work done on the ground? And then, I already talked about previous funding, but so we're thinking about all these things, the different metrics that I just mentioned. How do you weight those? Are they equally weighted? Do you give preference to this more important to us than that? I don't know. These are all things going on in our minds and the discussions we're having in our office. But I think, we're going to start thinking through this. In the past, we've tried to use our best judgment, and really all these things we've kind of used in the past, but it hasn't been necessarily a written down set of guidelines that work us through that all the time. So, I guess my thought is we know what we have for planning applications. We don't know what we're going to get for construction applications. Where are we going to be in the future? We've already talked about, or I've mentioned this idea with our planning. And I think we have to continue to do planning to have good construction projects. We can't just run around doing construction projects with no thought or, what's the best use of state dollars and all that stuff. So, what does it look like where we have a set dollar amount or a set percentage of the available funding that we spend on planning each year, and the rest goes to construction, and we're kind of guaranteed we're locked in, kind of a policy question, and things like that. So I guess I wanted to bring that up mainly because, we've heard what you guys, the questions you're asking. We know the situation we're going to be facing in the future. We're starting to think about that. We've thought about it in the past, but it's good that you guys have questioned us about that, because I think that gets us thinking about it more actively. And I think we'll try to employ some of these things a little bit as we're working through the construction applications this year and see, what seems to work, what doesn't. But I think it's going to be kind of an incremental process. And I also think that we need buy-in from the commission and from the legislature on how we go about doing that in the future, and prioritizing and equitable distribution of funds. And, do we split dollars up? I don't know, so much for ag, so much for, I don't know. How do we do that equitably? So I think more conversations are going to need to be had in the future. I think some small group conversations might be in order at some point in the future too, with commissioners and legislators. So I just wanted to mention that real quick as a discussion item. We have not forgotten about that. We're actively thinking about it. Would encourage you to provide us your thoughts. And like I said, hoping to get together maybe some individuals from different groups that might be representative of more the ag side of things and more representative of the municipal drinking water side of things, get us all together at some point, probably multiple times, so we can kick around some ideas and get this figured out into the future. So I just want to put that out there, but I'm not asking for any response or anything. I just wanted to mention that. But
We got a question from Senator.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to throw one thing in there, and that is we'll be receiving, because we've been talking in little groups on this side of the room a little bit too, about we'll be receiving that report on the aging irrigation infrastructure. We know we're having aging infrastructure, and I'm quite frankly struggling with the balance between, without having that in front of us, what are we grappling with as far as protecting the water resources we have, building new water resources, the balance there as well is going to be important going forward. And so I really appreciate that you guys are thinking about this and taking such a thoughtful approach. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I agree. I mean, it's hard, but I think it's easier to sell to the legislature anything if you can demonstrate and explain how you prioritize projects, because everybody has to prioritize things that come before us, whether it's school facilities or even capital construction, just state construction. They have to kind of prioritize what's important. So I think and in understanding it's very difficult, but I think in the end, it'll benefit you to do that. And reduced, as inflation grows and you're not getting any more money in the kitty, if not less money may come, then you're going to have to prioritize. So appreciate you doing it.
Yep. And I appreciate any thoughts people have. Write them down. When you have a thought, call me up. We'll talk about it. I'll tell you why it's either a great idea or, well, it doesn't work because of this. We've thought of that too, so I want it to be an active conversation that we continue to have. So.
Well, Jason, and know that I think I can probably talk for most of the commission that, we rely on your office to do that vetting, to understand the stuff we don't understand. Each one of us kind of has our own area that we're better in than others, but that, understand that you have our support on that. And if you need us for small groups, working with Select Water, a small group, and I think most of us be happy to be involved in that. So appreciate that.
Appreciate it. Okay. We've got one other, well, maybe two. We have Brian Dyke, if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm not sure of your title, but there's the Wyoming. No, go ahead. I guess come on up, introduce yourself and tell everybody why you're here.
I'm Brian Dyke. I farm in Powell. Grow grass seed on the Heart Mountain Irrigation Board. You guys all like professionals. I look like a dirt farmer. I can see that here, you guys. Last fall, I have another irrigation board man, Rick Herman from Alcova. Some of you might know him. I don't know. He contacted me with the idea of we need to have an association of irrigation districts. So we can all get together, band together. I know it's gonna be a dirty word, with everything you talk about today, ask for more money, do this, do that. So we started this process through the winter. And we actually had we all met down in Casper, about 20 districts did back in March. And we started association. We are an official association now with the state and everything. And what we're going to do is have an annual meeting in November in Casper. And some of the people here, their names have been talked about already. We had a Zoom meeting at 1 o'clock today about contacting people to come. I'd like everybody to come, but maybe a guest speaker or this or that from different offices. Our main goals are to protect water rights, save farmland. One of my pet peeve is state engineer's office. Why can't we get in the 21st century and transfer water rights with ArcGIS, GPS at a minimal cost compared to trying to spend in $3,000 or $4,000 to transfer a half-acre water rights, twice what the land's worth, just to move them. Why can't they get in the 21st century? That's all these things. But we're gonna have a conference and hopefully we're in the process right now of signing up irrigation districts. And we're working on that. Matter of fact, we're gonna start calling them all again, trying to get them to join. And we got associate members, which are like businesses that supply stuff to the irrigation district. And like the one I talked to several in my area, and the Farm Bureau insurance guy, Mountain West Insurance. I told him, without irrigated agriculture in Wyoming, you'd be selling insurance to jackrabbits and rattlesnakes. Who would be out there? it is important for the state. And I've heard 100 times already, aging infrastructure, inflation, all this stuff, man, it's hard to even fix anything. We did a inlet to one of our siphons about 14 years ago. And WWDC, they sort of like, build it at, it could be $1 million, well, it came in less than that. That $1 million, we built Buffalo Bill Dam for $1 million. Why is it just to inlet the one siphon gonna cost that much? It's crazy. And that's back in low inflation 15 years ago. Now, anyway, we're trying to band together as districts, have a united voice with the state, with the feds, everybody, and see if we can't, just, and it is too, as I say at the meeting, it's funny. Some districts do things that people don't know about. And we're talking there at this meeting in Casper, of somebody goes, we need to get into Wyoming retirement program. Everybody else said, we are. You are? You didn't even know you could. That'd be part of this organization too, just to pass information to each person. Anyway, that's my 2 bits. If anybody has a question, we'll probably invite a whole lot of you to our conference in November. I think it'll be 8th and 9th at the Ramcota in Casper. No questions? I'll get out of here. Sounds good.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, just a comment. Tomorrow on the tour, we will be going to Beartooth Seed, Brian's seed cleaning facility. He'll be the host for that as well. If you have questions you would like to ask him in person, that might give you opportunity while we're there.
That sounds great. Any other questions for him?
Okay, thank
Senator?
you.
No? Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, the last thing, reminder, tomorrow is the tour. It starts at 8 a.m. We're all going to gather in the parking lot at the Hampton Inn where most of us are staying, I would assume. Barry keeps telling me no open-toed shoes because we're be at Buffalo Bill Dam and they're going to take us down and you don't want to get your toes crushed. I guess yours aren't open-toed. So Larry, don't be wearing.
Did you hear that,
sandals
Commissioner
tomorrow.
Cott?
Yeah.
No.
Is there anything else? Okay, so anybody have any questions about that? Otherwise we can adjourn, I think.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one other thing I'd just like to throw out, and we don't have to discuss it. It's just something that's been on my mind and has to do with the schedule of the timing of our August meeting. It is and has been since I've been on the commission the same week as State Fair. Has caused some conflicts with at least one commissioner that I know of. It could in the future, and it may also cause conflicts with others that would like to either attend or has children or grandchildren that are participating in the State Fair. And I'd like the office to maybe consider an alternative week. Maybe it's been discussed and there's reasons why we're using the second week of August, but I'd like to at least have that, throw that out to you to talk about.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, we'll do everything to avoid that. I know we talked about that last year and there were reasons where we kind of ended up, what's that? Oh. Yeah, but we'll sure take that in consideration. Thank you.
With that, do we have a motion to adjourn? Second. All those in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned.